risking arrest.
I'm sitting here in front of the McDonald's Corporation where we are doing a civil protest for the Fight for 15. There is no one arrested yet, but we already have been told that it's possible for others to be arrested. I'm in front of the McDonald's Corporation with 1,000 plus people. We are protesting against McDonald's because they do not pay us a fair wage of $15 an hour, which is what we are requesting. And we have already been told that we are possibly going to be arrested.
Fight for 15 spokesperson Nasli Damasio says that McDonald's shutting down its corporate headquarters to avoid the worker protesters is a testament to the power of the fast food worker movement.
I think it just shows how much power this movement has. And instead of McDonald's playing games and shutting down headquarters, they should just listen to the demands of these workers and say that they're not struggling in poverty.
At the very time when more people are using public transit systems are struggling for money. It is an absolute no-brainer for Congress to refund the highway bill, which of course includes money for transit programs. It's a no-brainer. There's not going to be safe, affordable public transportation in the United States of America without the refunding of the bill.
Transport Workers Union Local 100 President John Samuelson, TWU, is urging substantial investment in public transit.
If there's any message that we want to get across, it's that, send money, pump money, invest money into public transit. It's good for American citizens, it's good for American workers, and it's good for the American economy.
Michigan's building and construction trade unions are contributing at least $3 to $5 million to a fund to help cover retiree benefits in the Detroit bankruptcy grand bargain. Republican Michigan House Speaker Jace Bolger demanded that unions fork over cash before the legislature approves the deal. The legislature must approve $195 million of an overall $816 million package for Detroit to help the city emerge from bankruptcy. The money is an effort to mitigate pension cuts for 32,000 Detroit public workers while preventing the sell-off of Detroit's Art Museum collection. Some foundations in the Detroit Institute of the Arts are pledging the bulk of the $816 million over 20 years. The National Labor Relations Board says that the American Postal Workers Union has a right to seek details on a pilot program of privatization that the Post is conducting in the Midwest. The Postal Service had resisted sharing that information with the union, claiming those programs are exempt from the requiring disclosure. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
West side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rock on. Oh, and this time is my time. All right, love or hate, it don't matter. Stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but it don't matter. 'Cause this is my time.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here tonight on the big program. Lots of things to get to, lots of things to talk about. Oh, are there? And, as I predicted right from the start, I said months ago that the second the primary election was over, the second that the Democrat, whoever it may have been, as soon as we knew who that was going to be, the attacks were going to start fast, furious, hot and heavy, and the Corbett folks have not disappointed. They have, with all of their surrogate groups, all of their backhanded institutions, all of the euphemistically named groups, and even made up some new ones. They are putting both barrels on Tom Wolf and going after him. And the one that I guess I have to chuckle about is evidently Wolf's company was incorporated in Delaware. Now, the governor, if he was really opposed to someone incorporating in Delaware, he has the power. He's the damn governor. He's got the power to close that loophole that I have been calling to be closed every day that I've been on the air here. For the last almost 9 years, I've been saying, you know what, that Delaware loophole, that Delaware magic box, that magical, mythical little box that scrubs profit. Maybe we should close that. Just a thought. And here's the funny thing. When I asked Tom Wolf about it, he said that he was interested in closing it. He would harm himself. Now, what I find really very interesting, very, very interesting, is that the governor has defended that, left it wide open, and because knowing, look, there's a lot of money that could be made from saying, you know what, if you make profit in Pennsylvania, pay taxes on it. The right wing loves to say, oh, and I've heard it a million times, you know, Rick, Pennsylvania has one of the highest corporate tax rates in the entire free world. Pennsylvania's way up there. They're at the top, almost at the top. They're way, way up there, Rick. Don't you know that? And while on paper, yes, we have a relatively high corporate tax rate. On paper, mind you, 75%. 3/4 of the companies in this state don't pay it. So again, you know, it's back to that bear in the woods thing. It's back to if a tree falls in the woods, can you hear it? It's back to if we have the highest rate and nobody pays it, do we really have the highest rate? And look, here's the reality. I have been in favor and will remain in favor of closing the Delaware loophole. Period. Then we can start having a conversation about how we lower the rate, if that needs to happen. But take the money that we gain from it and invest it in education. Because yesterday, right before we signed off, I got an email saying, hey, did you hear about what happened in Philadelphia? And as a parent of small children, horrified me. This idea that maybe your school has a nurse on Thursday and every other Friday horrifies me. And, you know, where I live is a relatively decent school district. It's not the top of the food chain. It's not at the bottom. It's right solidly in the middle. And they have a nurse. So I guess, you know, maybe now, I guess I need to reevaluate what the top of the list looks like. Does having a nurse on site caring for the kids who may come in, go, maybe tracking what ailments they have, knowing in advance, do kids have asthma? Do they have allergies? Does having a librarian put you at the top of the academic, of the school cycle? Does having a guidance counselor, does that put you at the top? And I sat back and as I was talking to my daughter today, going, you've got all these things, right? She's like, yeah, we have a nurse and we have a guidance counselors. In fact, we do counseling every so often, talk about grades and stuff. And I'm going, I can't imagine a school that doesn't. I just can't. I cannot imagine that there is a school that says, well, if you're going to get sick, wait till Thursday, especially in an area of high poverty. And this is what really stuck me with this case. And for those who don't remember or weren't around last night when I talked about it, a 7-year-old boy went to school yesterday, had some type of episode. We don't know. No one knows what it is yet. And maybe we'll never know. I don't know. But as of this moment, nobody knows really what it was. We know that the kid walked to school. We know that he was perfectly healthy. He was perfectly okay when you looked at him. And then within that day, pronounced dead at the hospital. We know that. And what we also know is there was no nurse there to give that kid even a chance. Because look, just because you're trained in CPR, and I was, a number of times trained in CPR, and I'll be the first to tell you, if I ever had to use it, I never felt confident that I knew what the hell I was doing. But I passed the course 5 times. Never truly felt confident that if someone were having a heart attack, someone were having it, that I would be the guy to save them. And I think most people who take these CPR courses feel the same way. So to say, well, there were 3 people in the building who knew CPR. They read the book and they pumped on Annie's chest a little bit and breathed into her mouth. So here's your ticket. There were 3 people in the room. There wasn't a nurse in the damn room. And I know the joke has always been about the school nurse. Well, they give out candy and they pat kids in the back and watch them lay down. There's actually, for that one time that, your kid may need that person who knows what the hell's going on to be able to save them. And I read a story of the woman who used to be the nurse at that school before the budget cuts, before the massive budget cuts. And whose budget cuts? Corbett's budget cuts. Billions of dollars of money taken away from education, and mostly from schools who couldn't afford it. And because they couldn't raise their property taxes because there's no property tax base there. So what happens? Well, slash and burn. And also, in the Philadelphia schools, that whole privatization, that whole profitization move. So I'm looking at this and I'm going, thank goodness that my kids aren't in this. But here's the thing. If we allow those kids in Philadelphia and in others, in Reading and in other city school districts, that if we allow that to happen to them, how long is it before it happens to us? And it was just one of those moments of coincidence that my second grader, the nurse from his school today sent me an email saying, we're just updating everyone's dental records. Can you make sure that, that you get us a copy of the latest? And it just happened that yesterday my wife took him to the dentist. It was just really very weird that the request comes the next day. Maybe she knew something. But she's requesting dental records. Just to make sure that the kids are kept up so that they know which kids aren't getting care so that maybe they can help. And this is the thing that I think is so important about having a nurse on site, because they know pre-existing conditions. They keep records and they know the kids. Having a rotating nurse once a week and maybe every other Friday, I'm sorry, that's not actually having someone who knows the kids. That's somebody who's walking around going, I'm here long enough just to know where the bathroom is. I'm not actually going to know what's going on. I'm here long enough to fill out some paperwork. And if it were my child, I would be fit to be tied. If it were my child, I'd be strangling somebody. And I don't know where you start. Do you start with the superintendent of the school district? Do you start with Hite? Do you start with the SRC? Do you start with Corbett? Because after all, these huge budget cuts and this push towards privatization, a large part of his responsibility. Now, the privatization part's been going on for a couple of decades now, thanks to our Republican friends who want to destroy public education. So what I'm saying, and the bottom line of this is very simple. If you think this is only a Philadelphia problem, you got another thing coming. Because at some point, and it's coming very soon, at some point the funding continues to dwindle from the state level, and there's only so much that it can be replaced. And what you end up with then is you end up with a starving school district. And that's what they want. Because then you can move it over to be privatized. That's the end game. Don't be fooled by any of the other rhetoric. This is, the end game here is purely privatization, purely profit. Now, there are some. Now, look, I know there are some people who run charter schools who truly care about kids, truly care about education. But the reality, they also care about profit. It's a business. It's not a public good. And that's my big problem with this whole thing. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit, first hour, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, because this is the second kid the second kid in a year to go to school in that district and not go home at the end of the day. And I gotta wonder, is this new? I haven't in my searching, I haven't been able to find kids who went to school and didn't go home at the end of the day for no reason or because of an illness. I haven't found that. But now this is two. The 6th grader back in September, and now this 7-year-old. There's something seriously wrong. Something seriously wrong. And to me, bordering on criminal. And I know if this were a well-to-do school district, there would be some accountability. There would be heads rolling. But what I find interesting is the response from the school district was, well, you know, if there wasn't a nurse, if the nurse was there, she couldn't have done anything anyway. Think about that. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
The Rick Smith Show.
It's time for The World in 2 minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service at the United Nations in New York. Here at the UN this morning, Security Council vetoes from China and Russia sunk an effort to refer Syria to the International Criminal Court, the 4th time Russia's blocked action on Syria since 2011. Here's Russia's Vitaly Churkin explaining the veto.
The draft resolution rejected today reveals an attempt to use the ICC to further inflame political passions and lay the groundwork, in the end, for eventual outside military intervention.
U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power disagreed, saying Russia wanted to prevent Syrians from testifying about their government.
It is important for us here today to hear the kind of testimony we might have heard if Russia and China had not raised their hands to oppose accountability for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
The ICC may not hear the case of Syria, but observers say it's the Security Council that's more at risk of atrophy due to the impasse among its members. Simon Adams leads the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect.
It's really interesting to see how many ambassadors at the Security Council from elected countries have today raised the issue of voluntary restraint on the use of the veto, on the need for reform of the Council.
And the Thai military seizes power after a day of failed political negotiations. But even if the army can maintain order, as it's attempted in 12 previous coups since 1932, there's a lot of work to be done to put Thailand on the right path. Protesters say the ruling Shinawatra family manipulates the electoral process, offering handouts to poor farmers in exchange for votes. So, instead of calling for fresh elections, they want to see reform first. Can the army govern Thailand better than its caretaker or interim government? Only time will tell. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Hey there, fellow working class heroes. I have some great news. You can now get the Rick Smith Show podcast on your iPhone, Android, BlackBerry, or Palm on demand and on the go. Get your class war to go by downloading the Stitcher app on your smartphone by going to Stitcher.com and search for The Rick Smith Show, or go to our website at thericksmithshow.com and click on our Stitcher button. Together we can, and we will, rebuild a prosperous working class and leave opportunity for our children.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME. We make Pennsylvania happen!
Every now and then I visit an elementary school. Talking with children is a pretty good idea, I think. They ask questions we don't think about, and they ask them very directly. Recently, a little girl wanted to know, what's the hardest part of your job? That got me thinking. I looked down and I told her, the hardest part is telling people no.
Except for that kid, except for all of those kids at the Jackson Elementary School, except for every one of those kids who the only time a nurse comes to their school is every Thursday, so don't get sick on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, and every other Friday, so don't get sick on the other Friday. Can't have that. I mean, really, as parents, can you see how despicable this is? I mean, look, I understand not having, shiny new doors, and I can understand, not having, elaborate gyms and stadiums and all of that. But a nurse, a librarian, a guidance counselor, really? The things I think most of us take for granted, the things that most of us say, maybe that's part of the minimum of education. And you know what the message is for this as well? And this is part of this whole scheme. Part of the whole scheme is to push, especially in the Philadelphia school district, especially in inner city school districts, push kids towards the cyber charters and the other charters. So by not having these things, you got parents going, well, I don't want to send my kids to this. I don't want my kids to get in be in a school where they're not safe. And then you get them pulling back, looking for alternatives. This is all by design. Absolutely, positively, without question, by design. Now, the people on the SRC, they may say, oh, we care. Oh, we do. We care. We just don't have the resources. But you don't hear them out there screaming, saying, hey, we need more resources. No. What the line we hear, those teachers should take pay cuts. Even more pay cuts than they've already taken. And they've had concessionary contract after concessionary contract. But you won't hear the SRC talk about that. It's that they want more. Now, at the end of the day, you want to blame someone for what's gone on in education, you got to look to the governor. You got to look to the priorities put forth by this guy. And we're going to hear an awful lot of rewriting of history over the next several days, over the next several weeks, over the next several months. We're going to hear the rewriting of what happened in Philadelphia, what happened to public education, and the budgetary priorities of this governor. The way it's going to come out as has his job numbers, where he's gone from 7th to 47th, 48th, depending on which numbers you look at. Even one set of numbers had him at 49. Either way, 47, 48, 49, not good. Still not 7th where he took over. Now, this was the guy who was going to bring us prosperity, going to create jobs, going to bring in the ideology of business friendly. And he has been really business friendly. You have to give him credit for that. You have to put credit where credit is due. He has been really, really very much in the pocket of business. But what's it done for the Commonwealth? What's it done for workers? What's it done for taxpayers? Not good. And I love hearing the right-wing nuts going, oh, Wolf wants to raise taxes. Yeah, it's called investing. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe the business owners, and this is the thing that gets me, the Chamber of Commerce, especially the national one. They're out there screaming and hollering, oh, we don't want any taxes. We don't tax business. We don't want to tax anything. But we want all this investment. And where do you think that comes from? Yeah, it comes from our taxes. It comes from what we pay. And I find it interesting, especially with my right-wing friends. Because look, like anybody, I'm not thrilled with paying taxes. But if it's put to good use, I'm okay with it. I make a decent living. I think we should be leaving something better for our children. If we're investing in better roads, better bridges, better education, better opportunities, you know, it's a positive. It's moving us in the right direction, like my grandparents did. I mean, really, that's the reality. We're living off of the investments my grandparents' generation made. And what's going on year after year after year, those investments have deteriorated because they're old. You know, I still, you know, the other night on Tuesday, we talked with Brian Sanguinito. He's a teacher in the Reading School District. And I can't get it out of my head that he would say, you know, during the winter, when it snowed, it literally snowed in the classroom. You would have to shovel the classroom because there was snow in the classroom. They couldn't fix the roof. There was no budget for it. And is that the right priorities? And I look at this little kid. I cannot imagine the parents and the struggles that come along with this. But here's what infuriates me. Here's what really honestly and truthfully infuriates me. We've had this tragedy because this is the mindset. Understand, this is the mindset of a lot of people who try to do things on the cheap. We're going to cut this stuff. We're going to cut this stuff down. We're going to roll the dice. We're going to gamble. Not with our kids, not with our future, not in our family, no, with someone else's. So we're going to roll the dice and well, hope nothing happens. Hope nothing bad happens. But when it does, and this invariably happens every single time, the bad happens. And when the bad happens, it ends up costing a ton more. So now what they're going to have is they're going to bring in a team of specialists and a team of grief counselors and a team of all of these people to help these kids, and they're going to be there as long as they need to be, and this whole 9 yards. And you go, well, how much is that going to cost? And then it brings me back to the business mentality. Well, it might cost less than making sure that there was a nurse at that school. It might cost a little bit less. So in the long run, the costs, the bottom line, the bean counters who are running education, much like the bean counters who run hospitals, they're the ones making the absolute decision. So we've made the economic, the dismal science economic decision that this kid's life was maybe worth a couple $1,000s. We saved a couple $1,000s by not having a nurse there. And that's okay. One of the numbers that caught my attention, back in 2011, that's not all that long ago. Just my idiot third grade math, that was just 3 years ago. There were 289 nurses in the Philadelphia school districts. 289 in 2011. Last fall, 179. It's almost a third. That's over a third. Almost a third of the nurses gone. 110 nurses gone. So what you end up with is a situation where and this isn't something you can just work harder. Sorry, just put in more hours. Can't do that because the days are uniform. So how many kids are left vulnerable? I mean, that's the thing that gets me. How many kids are going to suffer because of this? When you look at that kind of cut, and then you move it to the next step, to the librarians. You move it to the step after that, to the guidance counselor. How many kids aren't going to get into college because they can't they couldn't get the forms filled out for student aid? Because I don't know about you, but I've actually filled some of those out in my lifetime. They are not easy. And I consider myself somewhat educated. I hope I can fill out most forms. I've got a master's degree. I should be able to maneuver my way through these. I'll tell you, they are difficult. And if you don't have a high school education, as some parents in this district do not, someone's got to be there for it. And to me, all of this cutting, all of this austerity, all of this, not a good thing. Not a good thing at all. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Any ideas, any questions, any suggestions? How do we fix this situation? Is this what we'd want to see in our district? I'm curious your thoughts. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
During the audience, he issued another warning.
Nostro in confronto al creato.
Pope Francis calls on Christians to protect creation, or else.
We need to get over this angry hatredness and really turn to following the God that I know best in Christ and his love and leading us out of climate change.
Evangelical environmentalists organize to address climate change. CNN's chief says climate change is too boring to cover. Plus,
they are a spectacular sight.
Meet your newest national monument, Organ Pipes Desert Peaks in New Mexico.
All of those too boring stories straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Pat Sajak, the Wheel of Fortune host, spun out of control on Twitter this week. Sajak blasted environmentalists saying global warming alarmists are unpatriotic racists.
Unpatriotic racists. That makes no sense at all. Could I buy a clue? This is your Green News Report.
Wheel of Denial.
Okay, Desi Doyen, I'm noticing a religious theme to today's episode of the GNR. Am I correct?
Yes, you are. Absolutely.
See, nothing gets by me. Very sharp.
You're very quick.
Yes.
We start with Pope Francis.
Who?
He says we have a moral obligation to address climate change and care for creation in a landmark catechesis.
A what?
It's called a catechesis. And that was this week before a massive crowd in Rome. Pope Francis said that Christians should be, quote, custodians of creation, and warned that failure to care for the planet risks dire consequences.
The Pope hates America. Press on.
Nostro in confronto al creato.
We must protect creation, because if we destroy creation, creation will destroy us. Never forget this.
Totally hates America.
Well, the Pope would disagree with you. His speech came on the heels of a week-long sustainability summit at the Vatican focused on finding ways for the Catholic Church to address the disproportionate impact of climate change on the global poor. And in the U.S., that concept is also gaining ground, with a growing number of evangelical organizations working on what they call creation care, trying to convince their fellow Christians to stop denying the science of climate change and instead address it and protect the environment. The Reverend Mitch Hescox, president of the Evangelical Environmental Network, told CNN this week that his goal is to get past political partisanship.
But I think that's one of the problems in America today. And my job is to cross that bridge. You know, we don't want to beat up anybody, but we want to be the bridge builder that truly offers the love of Christ to help them to realize the serious impact and the serious nature of climate change.
Okay, that guy hates America too. The Evangelical Church and the Catholic Church both hate America. Great.
No, actually, I think they're trying to make sure that people pay attention to, God's creation.
Whatevs.
Now, again, that interview was on CNN, which has been roundly criticized for focusing on stories like the missing Malaysian airliner and failing to cover the threat of climate change. The president of CNN, Jeffrey Zucker, sparked quite a bit of controversy this week when he admitted at an event in New York that CNN does not cover climate change enough, But he essentially blamed viewers for being bored, saying, quote, "We haven't figured out how to engage the audience in that story in a meaningful way. When we do those stories, there does tend to be a tremendous amount of lack of interest on the audience's part."
Hey, Jeff Zucker, Brad Friedman, and Desi Doyen of the Green News Report are ready to come to CNN and liven things up a bit with some not boring at all green news. Give us a call.
Or alternatively, CNN loves to cover natural disasters, so maybe we should just wait until there are so many disasters that it interests Jeff Zucker.
Oh, so you're not saying it'd be a natural disaster if you and I were on CNN?
Certainly not.
Thank you. Okay.
Meanwhile, like the Pope, President Obama was also focused on good stewardship of the earth this week when he signed a proclamation formally designating nearly 500,000 acres of land in southern New Mexico as the new Organ Mountains Desert Peaks National Monument.
More than 130 years ago, Billy the Kid took cover and literally left his mark, inscribing his name into what we now know as Outlaw Rock. You can see it today, and I want to make sure that future generations can see it as well. And all of it supports the local economy and jobs in the region. So we're not just preserving history. Outdoor recreation at parks and forests and other public lands brings in tourism dollars. I've preserved more than 3 million acres of public lands for future generations, and I am not finished. So
there goes Obama, big government taking over all our public lands. Somebody call Cliven Bundy.
Now, national monument status will ensure that future generations can also see the Native American petroglyphs in that national monument. Cattle will still be allowed to graze there, but all drilling and fracking will be prohibited.
Land grabber. For much more on those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website, not CNN's, at greennews.bradblog.com. While you're there, please consider a donation to help the Green News Report stay on the air until we are hired by CNN. Find us on the Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been...
This is CNN.
No, this has been your Green News Report.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
A couple emails during the break that caught my attention. John says, I'd be expletive killing someone if it was my child. Susan writes, I'd be, well, again, more words can't say on terrestrial radio. And, the general consensus of the emails that I'm getting from folks on this story, on this situation in Philadelphia, outrage, anger, passion. And the thing that gets me is, I don't think the vast majority of people realize that it comes down to, in my view, this governor's budget. Pure and simple. And this whole push towards privatization and profitization of the school system in our state and in our country. I mean, this is a systematic move towards dismantling public education. You just got to call it what it actually is. I appreciate the emails. Thanks so much. I've got Jerry Jordan, president of the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers, on the line. Jerry, thanks for taking time for us.
Good evening, Rick. Good to be with you.
This horrible tragedy, the responses I'm getting from folks, what I feel about it is anger, it's frustration, and it's just this feeling of how is it that in our schools in this day and in this age you don't have at least at the barest of minimums a nurse? That makes no sense to anyone yet.
It doesn't make sense, and I am shaken by what has happened. It's not the first time this school year. It's the second time that we have lost a young child because the school district has not properly resourced the buildings. They've eliminated the nursing services in our schools. Many of our nurses are now reduced to working in 4 or 5 schools during the course of one day, only dealing with the chronically ill youngsters and going on to the next school.
Well, how do you know? how do you know which kids are, if you're there every Thursday and once every other Friday, how do you really know these kids? How do you know what their problems are? I mean, I'm sure the parents aren't coming supplying all of this information. That's kind of a personal relationship thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The nurses are not able to build up those relationships with the families and with the children to be able to know when look at a child and know that that child is in distress. It is unacceptable that the resources have been slashed to that degree. And this is not the first year that we've had the lack of nurses.
Right.
I mean, over 100 nurses have been reduced in the budget in the school district of Philadelphia, and all of our fragile children are literally hanging, in the midst of this. I mean, there is no talk about or concern, obviously, about what's going to happen to the babies.
Now, I keep asking the question, what's going to take someone to die? And here we are in this situation, this 7-year-old kid. Now, I don't know all of the particulars. I don't know if a nurse could have saved this kid. But you know what? I would be willing to take the risk of giving the kid a fighting chance by having someone who knew what they were doing.
Absolutely. And with the loss of the child earlier this school year, the child died of an asthmatic attack and who complained all year, all day about not feeling well. And those people in the buildings who are not medically trained just suggested to the child, put your head down on the desk, rest for a few minutes, hopefully you'll feel better.
Hopefully.
A trained nurse would have been able to identify a child in crisis and would have known how to deal with a kid who has asthma. She knew, the nurse who was at that school regularly knew the child had a problem with asthma and would have looked at that issue immediately and diagnosed that kid's needs. And the same thing is probably true in this case. It's just unacceptable that we are sending our kids to school and we're not providing them with the very fundamentals. Nurses are not frills.
Yeah, I mean, and neither are librarians or counselors or any of those other positions either. But I looked at the numbers, and in 2011, according to this report by Dan Denver over at the City Paper, there were 289 nurses in 2011. This past fall, 179. You're talking about 110 nurses slashed, almost 40% of the nurses slashed from the district, and that's not exactly because they retired.
No, not at all. His numbers are very accurate.
Let me ask you this then, because as a parent, I feel for these families. Back in September when LaPortia Massey died, and the outrage that went with that, because I've got a 6th grade daughter. I can't imagine the pain, the suffering that these families are going through.
No, nor can I.
But I got to think on some level, someone has to be held accountable. And as I was looking at the statements coming out from people from the SRC and the superintendent, I didn't see any willingness to accept accountability. I didn't see any willingness to say, hey, we've got to change things. I didn't see any willingness to say, hey, we've got to get money from the governor or from somewhere to be able to get these healthcare professionals in here. I didn't see any of that. All I saw was, a nurse probably wouldn't have done any good anyway.
Which is an absolutely reprehensible response. That when we know that we do not have enough nurses in our schools, that is not acceptable because we don't know what the child died of. But I can be very, very comfortable in saying that I know that if a medically trained person was there in the building, knew that child, they would have been able to have probably identified a problem that the child had earlier in the day in order to make sure that whatever happened, whatever the cause of death was, could very well not have gotten to the point of causing the child's death.
And the kid would have had a fighting chance, at least a fighting chance. Right. Because here's the thing. Here's the thing, Jerry. I've taken a number, and I said this earlier, I've taken CPR a number of times. As many times as I've taken it, I have never felt confident that if the emergency had arisen, that I needed to Jerry Jordan was on the ground with a heart attack, that I would have to go save you. I never felt comfortable that I would be able to do that. Because, look, you do it once a year for a couple hours on a Saturday, you blow into Annie's mouth, maybe push on her chest a little bit, and boom, you're certified. So by saying they had certified CPR people in there gives me no comfort whatsoever.
It shouldn't give you any comfort because it just so happened that the Jackson School had 2 people who were certified in CPR, but the vast majority of the schools do not have people who are certified in CPR.
But even if they're certified in CPR, as I was for a number of years, these are not healthcare professionals. These are not people who this is their career.
No, I took a CPR course a number of years ago. I was certified in CPR. Big deal. I don't have the skills that a certified school nurse has.
So what do we do? I mean, to me, this should be a key, and I hate to use the tragedy of 2 children's death, but this has got to be a key issue in this upcoming election for governor, because I blame this all on the priorities, the morality of this governor's budgets.
Oh, absolutely. And today, Randy Weingarten, who is the AFT national president, Ted Kirsch, who is the AFT Pennsylvania president, and I sent a letter to Governor Corbett saying that we are very, very upset by what happened at the Jackson School with the death of this child. We sent a letter when LaPortia Massey died earlier in last fall and during the school year about her death, which, by the way, we never got a response from the governor to our letter. We sent another one today saying that the resources have to be restored. We need nurses in our schools. And we will see whether or not we hear from the governor.
Let me ask you this question, because, as I was thinking about this, there are two kids this year. Have you had this in the past? I mean, in past years, have kids gone to school and died at school? Has this something that's, because I wasn't able to find anything in my research. In your experience, have you ever had 2 kids in 1 year in situations like this?
No, I do not remember this ever happening, which is why it has just shaken me and so many others to the core.
Because I look at this and, look, I understand the end game ideology, which in my opinion, you could agree or disagree, is to destroy public education and privatize the whole thing, put these kids into cyber charters and the charter schools so that the profiteers can steal their futures. But this is the wrong way of going about it, in my view.
Rick, I don't disagree with you one bit. That is exactly the intent. And to make public schools seem so unsafe that parents do not put their children in the public schools that have done a tremendous job of educating so many millions of young people over the course of the years, and to say that the schools are not safe because if you can't have a nurse who will be there to take care of your baby, why would you put that kid there?
How much money is being diverted from public education in Philadelphia into these cyber charters and into these charter schools? How much money is being taken over? Because to me, it's the old divide and conquer. You're splitting the pie in half, and you're giving half of it off over the year, while your public school, your main entity, is not putting nurses in schools.
This school year, at this time, the school district is asking for, it needs $440 million because they have that deficit of $440 million. This current school year, not talking about the next fiscal year that begins July 1st, the school district is spending $700 million on charter schools.
$700 million on charter schools?
Yes, almost 1/3 of its budget on charter schools.
And how much of that is actually making it to the classroom? How much ends up into the pockets of the profiteers, like what's his name, Gregorian, I guess? How much ends up in his pocket?
Well, I think that when we look at our TVs, we see the ads advertising for charter schools during prime time, and that's not a cheap ad. When you see them during dinner time and during the course of our evening viewing. So therefore, they certainly have enough of our taxpayer money to advertise on TV in order to try to recruit students to their schools.
Yeah, anytime we see that K-12 added, it just infuriates me going, there are tax dollars right there making Comcast and these other companies profits while taking money out of the kids' class, my kid's classroom.
That's right. And when you look at the results of the charter schools, the academic results, and anyone can check the state exam scores, and they will see that the vast majority of the charter schools do not do as well as the traditional public schools. But we're spending millions of dollars. And we're in our districts, and I gave you the example of the cost of what Philadelphia is spending, but in the communities that have charter schools, they are suffering deficits. They're dealing with their property taxes going up as a result of the charter schools, and their schools are sacrificing music and art and nurses and phys ed and other counselors and other kinds of services for their children in their schools and their communities.
Yeah, that's another part of this. Sacrificing the nurses and the guidance counselors in the libraries is one thing, and then you're also on top of that sacrificing art and music and athletic programs. And as I've said, maybe to you in the past, but I've said on this program a number of times, had it not been for athletics, in my lifetime, going to high school, I would have never finished high school, let alone got a bachelor's degree and a master's degree. I'd have never gotten out of high school, because that's what kept me there. And for each kid, something different. And as we're narrowing public education down to just being able to fill in a little bubble, we're losing kids.
Yes, we are. And I think that we all have to now say, stop. You've gone too far. This is the second child that we've lost, and we're not going to allow this to happen. Let's correct what's going on. We have to make sure that the governor restores the money to school systems.
And you hear people say all the time, Jerry, well, money isn't everything, and I always respond, well, until you don't have it. And I look at this case, your districts don't have it because this governor took it away. And then I ask the question on the other side, these two kids are dead. If their families are smart, and I hope they are, I hope they sue the hell out of the school district and this governor to make a point. You can't do things on the cheap and wish and hope nothing bad happens, because bad stuff happens.
That's right. Money matters. And I say it because it does. If money didn't matter, why is it that all of the private schools have smaller class sizes? Why is it that they offer the children the extra support that they need? Why is it that they offer the extracurricular activities? Why is it that they offer music and art? Why is it that they offer band and other kinds of extracurricular activities for children? Because it matters.
So what do you say to the person, well, that's just Philadelphia. That's their problem. That's their problem. It could never happen here. I mean, I just came from my daughter's concert recital. She's in the chorus, and it was a lovely event with all the teachers and all the parents and all of this stuff going on. And I couldn't help but sit there wondering, what about school districts that don't have the ability to do this stuff? What about school districts that are, thanks to this governor and these budgets, are not offering extracurriculars? Because on the back of the program that they gave us, it said that kids who participate in music activities see SAT scores like 60 points higher.
That's right.
So why wouldn't we give every kid that opportunity?
It's our responsibility as the educators, as the adults, to make sure that our children are well-rounded. And to deny them those services means that we're denying them the opportunity to get a good education, to compete with children from around the world. Our children are no longer competing with their neighbors. They're competing with the children in China, in India, in London, in Finland, Singapore, because the world that we're living in today is so computerized, and children no longer just staying in their neighborhood. They're going to be competing to go into universities, and we have a responsibility as adults, and we know what's right for children. We have to just do.
So what do parents do? What's the marching orders coming out of this? You know, as you look at this tragedy, and I don't want this to happen to any parent. I don't want this to happen to any child, any family. What's the marching order? What do we do? What do concerned people do?
I believe that as citizens that we have to make education a number one priority and determine that we will vote for people who are going to be pro-education, because these are the people who are going to make decisions for our children, whether they're running, whether it's candidate Corbett or Wolf running for governor, whether it is someone running for state senate, whether it's someone running for the State House of Representatives, or whether it's someone running for a row office in our local communities. Education has to be at the top of our list of reasons why we're going to vote for someone. And if they do not respond the correct way to make sure that our children will be able to get the very best, then we shouldn't vote for them.
Well, here's the right-wing line that I get when I ask the question about education. I get the line of, you know, Jerry, I believe in education. I believe parents should have choices, and we should be able to have cyber charters and all of these other things. And maybe if the public schools are good, maybe that's a choice as well. And it's a very enticing argument, because I want to have the choice of what's best for my kids. But when you look at it, by going this route, the choices usually aren't all that great. And what it does is it's destroying our public education as well. So all choices seem to be bad.
Well, it's destroying our public education, but they need to look at the performance of the choices that they're given. If the alternative is worse than what your community public school is, why would you go to it and take the money out of your public school? I think people just don't clearly understand what's happening. And they take the money out of the public schools and increase your taxes. When people understand it, that that's what's happening, then I think they will see it differently.
Now, you know, last Saturday we celebrated the 60th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, ending the idea of separate but equal. And I got to be honest, right now, separate but equal seems okay at this point, because everybody else has got nurses. We're not even equal anymore.
No, and it really is separate and unequal. That's exactly what we have.
Which is why we've got to fight them. Why I think November is so very important. Jerry,
it's
I appreciate
critically important.
I appreciate you taking time for us during this crisis and this tragedy to fill us in. Our heart goes out to the family, and I wish you guys the best.
Thank you. Good night.
Jerry Jordan, president of PFT, the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers. Like I said, man, I'm as a parent, I can't imagine what it must be like to send my kid off to school and have to worry every day, is something going to happen, and not trust that the people that I've handed my kids over to every day, when my kids get on those buses, that they're not going to be safe, that they're not going to be well cared for, that if something happens, that there's going to be no one there to help them. And, you know, after the LaPortia Massey died last September, I actually went to my local schools and, you know, what's the emergency plan? I talked to the nurse. I talked to the woman at the front. What's the plan in the event of this or that or the other thing? What's the game plan? And they very nicely, you know, walked me through the game plan. Very nicely let me know that everything was going to be okay. But, you know, I can't imagine being in a place where it wasn't. And this is what's frustrating to me. And this is why, like I said, I think November is so very important. And the person that we put into the governor's mansion is so important. We've seen the Corbett priorities. We've seen what they do. We've seen the budgetary priorities, the morality of the budget. I'm not impressed. Quick break, right back.
It's the Rick Smith Show on Country Gold Radio, WIOO Carlisle and WEEO Shippensburg.
You're listening to Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Rather than face the protests and hear the voices of its workers, McDonald's Corporation Wednesday closed and cleared its corporate headquarters in Illinois. The workers brought their fight for $15 an hour and a union to the corporate headquarters, where McDonald's is holding its annual shareholders meeting. About 100 workers sat down, risking arrest in a civil disobedience action. Emmanuel Gonzalez was one of the workers risking arrest.
I'm sitting here in front of the McDonald's Corporation, where we are doing a civil protest for the Fight for 15. There is no one arrested yet, but we have already been told that it's possible for others to be arrested. I'm in front of the McDonald's Corporation with 1,000 plus people. We are protesting against McDonald's because they do not pay us a fair wage of $15 an hour, which is what we are requesting. And we have already been told that we are possibly going to be arrested.
Fight for 15 spokesperson Nasli Damasio says that McDonald's shutting down its corporate headquarters to avoid the worker protesters is a testament to the power of the fast food worker movement.
I think it just shows how much power this movement has. And instead of McDonald's playing games and shutting down headquarters, they should just listen to the demands of these workers and pay them a living wage because they're not struggling in poverty.
But the very time when more people are using public transit systems are struggling for money. It is an absolute no-brainer for Congress to refund the highway bill, which of course includes money for transit programs. It's a no-brainer. There's not going to be safe, affordable public transportation in the United States of America without the refunding of the bill.
Transport Workers Union Local 100 President John Samuelson, TWU, is urging substantial investment in public transit.
If there's any message that we want to get across, it's that, send money, pump money, invest money into public transit. It's good for American citizens, it's good for American workers, and it's good for the American economy.
Michigan's building and construction trade unions are contributing at least $3 to $5 million to a fund to help cover retiree benefits in the Detroit bankruptcy grand bargain. Republican Michigan House Speaker Jace Bolger demanded that unions fork over cash before the legislature approves the deal. The legislature must approve $195 million of an overall $816 million package for Detroit to help the city emerge from bankruptcy. The money is an effort to mitigate pension cuts for 32,000 Detroit public workers while preventing the sell-off of Detroit's Art Museum collection. Some foundations and the Detroit Institute of the Arts are pledging the bulk of the $816 million over 20 years. The National Labor Relations Board says that the American Postal Workers Union has a right to seek details on a pilot program of privatization that the Postal Service is conducting in the Midwest. The Postal Service had resisted sharing that information with the union, claiming those programs are exempt from the union contract requiring disclosure. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Do you advocate getting rid of the minimum wage? Would that create more jobs?
Absolutely, and it would help the poor, the people who need a job. The minimum wage is a mandate. We're against mandates, so why should we have it? No, it would be very beneficial.
Everything's raising, but the wages. Everything's raising, but the wages. Gasoline, groceries, and our wages. Everything's raising, but the wages.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. We were supposed to have one of the fast food workers who was out in Chicago for the last couple of days. And if you see some of the pictures, coming from Chicago, scary stuff, man. Really very, very scary stuff. Riot police in military formation, riot gear, clubs, guns, water cannons, all to protect McDonald's Corporation. And it's very eerie. And you go back and you listen, you go back and you read some of our history. You go back and you think about what our past has been, and you look at the use of the military, of the police force in protecting the McDonald's against the rabble, the unwashed masses, the protesting people who are saying, you know what? We demand rights. Now, fortunately, from the reports I saw, fortunately there were no beatings or pepper spraying or any of the stuff that we've seen in other protests. But as you step back and You look at the powers stacked against workers. You look at the overwhelming force and the overwhelming might and the wealth and the control. The fact that you have people willing to stand up in the middle of the street and say no more, to me is incredibly brave and heroic. You know, I go back and I think about my grandparents' generation and some of the stories my grandfather told me of the organizing that went on during his lifetime. You know, you go back and you read the stories of the sit-down strikes. You go back and you read the stories of the goons and the thugs and the skull crackers coming in. And it's always been interesting to me that the wealth class has always been able to pay. And I guess it goes back to the old statement, and I haven't said it for a while. Jay Gould, the railroad magnate from the 1880s, is quoted as famously saying, "I could easily pay half the working class to kill the other half." And you look at a picture like this, these riot police with these this heavy the armor and all of this stuff on the riot gear and these clubs and all this weaponry against protesters with signs. And you look at these are working class people on both ends of it. The hired thugs now that we put tin badges on are protecting the wealth, the oligarchy class. You know, it reminded me of, when we were in Blair, West Virginia. And one of the reasons that the state, because initially when the strike at Blair Mountain happened, initially the governor sent in the National Guard. And the National Guard would not shoot on the workers, because they knew them. They were fellow citizens. They had fought together. They were brothers. They were in the military together. So they identified with each other, which is why when they called in the federal troops, they didn't seem to have any problem dropping bombs on people they didn't know. And I kind of look at this in this day and age. Now, I don't see us using drones, dropping bombs on workers yet. I don't see that happening anytime in the near future. But this idea of this overwhelming show of force that we're going to put down this protest of people who simply are saying, look, we want to be able to support our families through the work that we do. And I'm sad we didn't get through to them, because they're on the way back from Chicago, and who knows what cell transmission's like coming back on some of our roads. Which again, you talk about investment. It would be nice to be able to invest in some of that, but the number of people arrested, the number of people who intimidated by all of this. And I give these people credit for standing up and saying, we'll be the ones who are going to make things better. I'm just, it's one of those things. It's easy to sit back and point fingers, and it's easy to throw allegations and to use words. It's another thing to put your behind on the line. Just amazing stuff. Today, back in 1895, Eugene V. Debs, who got 1 million votes as the presidential candidate on the socialist ticket during one of the presidential elections. I think it was, I'm actually not sure what year it is. I'm going to have to look that up. But he, on this day, was arrested for his role in the Pullman strike. Because heaven forbid the organizers. It actually was the 1912 presidential election, now that I think about it, under 1 million votes. He ran for president 5 times under that Socialist Party banner. But in 1912 got 6% of the vote, over 1 million votes. And I keep saying, look, maybe we need those kind of voices again to keep pushing us towards a better society. The right wing of this country has moved us even further to the extreme right, to where I'm almost willing to say that we're right there. The fascist country that people claim we are. You got to wonder when all of the rhetoric we hear from our politicians is business friendly. Also today in 1920, the Federal Service Retirement Act of 1920 gave federal workers a pension, which interestingly enough, here we're not even 100 years later, and you've got those who want to destroy it and steal it. So that's also interesting. And also today in history, 1964, Lyndon Baines Johnson announced his goals for the Great Society social reforms and to bring an end to poverty and racial injustice. And, you look back at this, and as I said in the last hour, just last Saturday was the 60th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education decision, doing away with this concept, this idea, this separate but equal, that we could have black schools and white schools and whatever, Hispanic schools and Indian schools and all of it, but they could be separate, but they had to be equal. And they never were. When we were down in Arkansas, where the Arkansas 9 had gone to the high school there, the people that we talked to said, here are the pictures, here are the conditions of the white high school and the black high school, and you could see very clearly, not equal in any way, shape, or form. But you look back to now, and you look at that decision. You look to now, and we're not even equal. We're re-separating based on economic lines, but not even equal, and not even the facade, not even the make-believe equal. That's what's interesting to me. So when I see these workers, I see these fast food workers who are saying, you know what, our work matters. Our work is important. Our work should be rewarded. We're making millions and millions of dollars in profit. Actually, never mind millions, making billions of dollars of profit. We should be able to share that. And to me, that should be the battle cry, the rallying cry of the middle class of this country. Work should be rewarded. And if you remember, going back to 2008, when President Obama won as president in 2009 when he took office, I said my number one hope, my only hope, is that he would be the guy who would save work. He would be the guy who would save the reward of work. And what I meant by that is that, if you go, you punch the clock, you do your 40 hours, you have dignity, you have respect, you have the ability to put food on the table. And for me, the only way that happens is by giving people collective bargaining rights, giving them the ability to, through their labor, be able to support themselves. To me, that just seems common sense. And maybe you don't need the Great Society social reforms. Maybe you don't need all of these safety net programs. Maybe by saying, you know what, we're going to make sure that when people get the ability to work, they can support themselves. Because what's interesting to me, what we've done in this country and what the right has done masterfully is we have subsidized a low-wage workforce. We've subsidized a certain segment of the poor, the poor that we think are okay. Well, they're poor, but they're okay because they work. With those lazy poor, we don't want them. The ones who aren't on the bus line, the ones who didn't get the education to be able to get anything even at the McDonald's level because, well, a separate and unequal failed them. I often say, I grew up in the projects, yes, but I was granted and I was blessed with the skin on my body of being white, because had I been just another black guy living in the ghetto, I probably wouldn't have gotten out, because a lot of my friends didn't. So for me, race is important. And you look at the unemployment numbers among African Americans, extraordinarily high. And why is that? I've known some really very intelligent, bright friends who they couldn't find jobs. And what I respected about them is they never played the race card. They said, "Oh, I just didn't get it." Frustrating times, but you know what? I'm actually looking forward to the future, because I am seeing this organizing. We are seeing people who are saying enough already. And that's a good thing. And I have great hope for my kids and their generation. I think they're going to be smarter than we've been. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
It's time for The World in 2 Minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service at the United Nations in New York. Here at the UN this morning, Security Council vetoes from China and Russia sunk an effort to refer Syria to the International Criminal Court, the fourth time Russia's blocked action on Syria since 2011. Here's Russia's Vitaly Churkin explaining the veto.
The draft resolution rejected today reveals an attempt to use the ICC to further inflame political passions and lay the groundwork, in the end, for eventual outside military intervention.
U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power disagreed, saying Russia wanted to prevent Syrians from testifying about their government.
It is important for us here today to hear the kind of testimony we might have heard if Russia and China had not raised their hands to oppose accountability for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
The ICC may not hear the case of Syria, but observers say it's the Security Council that's more at risk of atrophy due to the impasse among its members. Simon Adams leads the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect.
It's really interesting to see how many ambassadors of the Security Council from elected countries have today raised the issue of voluntary restraint on the use of the veto, on the need for reform of the Council.
And the Thai military seizes power after a day of failed political negotiations. But even if the army can maintain order, as it's attempted in 12 previous coups since 1932, there's a lot of work to be done to put Thailand on the right path. Protesters say the ruling Shinawatra family manipulates the electoral process, offering handouts to poor farmers in exchange for votes. So, instead of calling for fresh elections, they want to see reform first. Can the army govern Thailand better than its caretaker or interim government? Only time will tell. For more global news headlines, visit talkradionews.com.
Hey there, fellow working class heroes. I have some great news. You can now get the Rick Smith Show podcast on your iPhone, Android, BlackBerry, or Palm on demand and on the go. Get your class war to go by downloading the Stitcher app on your smartphone by going to Stitcher.com and search for The Rick Smith Show, or go to our website at thericksmithshow.com and click on our Stitcher button. Together we can, and we will, rebuild a prosperous working class and leave opportunity for our children.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Uncovering the con in conservatism. Rick Smith.
Let's have a tea party like the grown-ups do. We'll serve the finest tea and fancy cookies too. Let's go through the neighborhood inviting everyone. Let's have a tea party, won't it be fun?
Yeah, wow, the Tea Party kind of declining. And I looked at the Daryl Metcalf situation out there in Cranberry, Pennsylvania, where, right-wing extreme crazy guy, Daryl Metcalf, almost got beat in a write-in against the guy that he had thrown off the ballot, had used the legal wrangling to keep off the ballot. Almost got beat, and it'll be interesting to see what happens to him in the primary. And it's always been one of those things that I can't imagine his district is as far out as he is. I can't imagine the people in that district are as extreme as he is. But they keep electing him for some reason. And in this case, they had a chance to write somebody in, almost beat him. And what's interesting is the numbers. When you look at the polling that's been done on the Tea Party, because for a while, every Republican, yeah, I'm a Tea Party guy, yeah. Now, not so much. In fact, CBS had just done a poll. And according to the poll, today, just 15% of the country says that they support the Tea Party. 15%. That's the lowest since CBS began asking the question back in 2010, which, they had their biggest support. Highest level, 31%. And those are your Republicans. And those were people like me at the beginning who said, early on I did. What the initial anger was, yeah, we're ticked off. Ticked off at Wall Street, ticked off at corporate America, and then, really bizarre right-wing turn. Because the money came in and co-opted it. When you started seeing big flashy buses with Tea Party Nation rolling down the road, you knew this was co-opted. You knew the money had taken over. And they were using the anger as, useful idiots. And I've told this story a million times. I remember going to one of the early rallies after I realized that, this was all co-opted. And there were 6 guys there, a guy and his 5 buddies. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon in Pittsburgh. And they were having this rally, and they've had their signs, and no government spending, and cut. And oddly enough, all 6 of them were on unemployment, and not just unemployment, but the federal unemployment. They were getting the extension money, and I said, I could easily cut government spending right now. We could just cut you off unemployment, make you get a job. Well, I can't find a job. So and whose fault is that? It's not government spending's fault. In fact, government spending creates jobs. If we invested more, if we primed the pump a little more. So I'm not surprised to see 32% of Republicans view themselves as Tea Party, which is down from 10% and back in February, and down 23% from July of 2010. And we've seen the downward slope. As people wake up and go, I can't believe I fell for that. You're starting to see people say, it's gotten co-opted. It's away from what I thought it was going to be. And what they ended up doing in 2010 is you ended up putting people like Tom Corbett into governor's mansions. What did he do? He told you what he was going to do. Austerity. He's going to cut education. He's going to cut social safety net program. He's going to cut investment. He's going to cut all of these things. Cut, and pander to business. And that's what he's done. And the question I have is, has it worked? I mean, there's an ideology that says this is what you do. This is, on paper it works. Has it worked for Pennsylvania? And that's what this November is going to be about. Has the ideology that's been pushed on us, this idea of giving everything and pandering to corporate special interest over that of our children and our infrastructure, has it worked? Now, I know the governor is going to spend a lot of money trying to rewrite the last 3.5 years and call himself the more jobs governor, and I guess more than New Mexico. But the sad reality is we've actually been worse off the last 3.5 years. And Corbett wasn't the only one who walked in 2010 on that Tea Party anger. You look at Wisconsin, Walker is in trouble. You look at Florida, Rick Scott is in trouble against a Democrat who used to be a Republican who I don't know where he's at. And then you looked at Maine, I'm another insaniac. And I found it interesting that evidently they released a report that LePage, the governor of Maine, had asked for. And it's, again, you got to love the ideology's still there. They did a privatized no bid contract with this consulting firm, Alexander Group, to take a look at the state's welfare system, analyze the welfare system. a $925,000 no-bid contract. And what they come back with? Well, we know what they came back with. It's the same stuff that Corbett's been doing. It's the same stuff that, and this is what drives me nuts. And it should drive you nuts too. You knew where this was going. You knew where LePage was going to go with this. The same place Corbett went, the same place Walker went, the same place Scott went, the same place Snyder in Michigan went. The same Alex stuff. And we paid, the people of Maine paid $925,000 to get what I could have told them was going to be the outcome for $50. Just give me $50. I'll come on, I'll tell you what it's going to be. You know what they were going to do. Cut general assistance. Immediately. Under the guise of reforming it. So you cut the funding for the most needy people. Cut the people who are just trying to make it to the next day, let alone the next week. Cut that by calling it reform. Like Corbett did when he cut 70,000 of the most vulnerable of our citizens off completely by ending and eviscerating the program. Also, the $925,000 no-bid reform analysis says, well, what you do is you eliminate those exemptions for that requirement that people work to get TANF. Like if they're sick or if they've got, sick kids, eliminate that because you know what? If they're sick and they got sick kids, they can't fight. So we can just kick them off. Good idea, right? And also make sure that there's a solid in-place job search and make it so onerous that it takes forever to get through the process. So you can kick them off. I mean, that's the goal. That is the end goal in all of this. So I'm surprised that they paid $925,000. Well, maybe I shouldn't be. Because, you look at these folks, they don't have a problem with wasting money. And if you looked at the money that our governor here in Pennsylvania spent fighting the same-sex marriage, what was it, like $580,000? I'll bet you, just a thought, I'll bet you we could have afforded a bunch of nurses for that kind of money. And you look at the $3 million that they wasted on legal fees to privatize the lottery. I'll bet you that would have paid for a lot of nurses. And the money that they've spent on the privatization of the wine and spirit shops, the millions and millions of dollars. And I'll bet you that money could have been spent on hiring some nurses. And you got to wonder, when you add all that up, all those priorities up, how many nurses would you have been able to hire? And would that 7-year-old have had a fighting chance? That's the question. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. For working people on the top.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
During the audience, he issued another warning.
Nostro in confronto al creato.
Pope Francis calls on Christians to protect creation, or else.
We need to get over this angry hatredness and really turn to following the God that I know best in Christ and His love and leading us out of climate change.
Evangelical environmentalists organized to address climate change. CNN's chief says climate change is too boring to cover. Plus,
they are a spectacular sight.
Meet your newest national monument, Organ Pipes Desert Peaks in New Mexico.
All of those too boring stories straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Pat Sajak, the Wheel of Fortune host, spun out of control on Twitter this week. Sajak blasted environmentalists saying global warming alarmists are unpatriotic racists.
Unpatriotic racists. That makes no sense at all. Could I buy a clue? This is your Green News Report.
Wheel of Denial.
Okay, Desi Doyen, I'm noticing a religious theme to today's episode of the GNR. Am I correct?
Yes, you are absolutely.
See, nothing gets by me. Very sharp.
You're very quick.
Yes.
We start with Pope Francis.
Who?
He says we have a moral obligation to address climate change and care for creation in a landmark catechesis.
A what?
It's called a catechesis. And that was this week before a massive crowd in Rome. Pope Francis said that Christians should be, quote, custodians of creation, and warned that failure to care for the planet risks dire consequences.
The Pope hates America. Press on.
Nostro in confronto al creato.
We must protect creation, because if we destroy creation, creation will destroy us. Never forget this.
Totally hates America.
Well, the Pope would disagree with you. His speech came on the heels of a week-long sustainability summit at the Vatican focused on finding ways for the Catholic Church to address the disproportionate impact of climate change on the global poor. And in the U.S., that concept is also gaining ground, with a growing number of evangelical organizations working on what they call creation care, trying to convince their fellow Christians to stop denying the science of climate change and instead address it and protect the environment. The Reverend Mitch Hescox, president of the Evangelical Environmental Network, told CNN this week that his goal is to get past political partisanship.
But I think that's one of the problems in America today. And my job is to cross that bridge. You know, we don't want to beat up anybody, but we want to be the bridge builder that truly offers the love of Christ to help them to realize the serious impact and the serious nature of climate change.
Okay, that guy hates America too. The Evangelical Church and the Catholic Church both hate America. Great.
No, actually, I think they're trying to make sure that people pay attention to, God's creation.
Whatevs.
Now, again, that interview was on CNN, which has been roundly criticized for focusing on stories like the missing Malaysian airliner and failing to cover the threat of climate change. The president of CNN, Jeffrey Zucker, sparked quite a bit of controversy this week when he admitted at an event in New York that CNN does not cover climate change enough, but he essentially blamed viewers for being bored, saying, quote, "We haven't figured out how to engage the audience in that story in a meaningful way. When we do those stories, there does tend to be a tremendous amount of lack of interest on the audience's part."
Hey, Jeff Zucker, Brad Friedman, and Desi Doyen of the Green News Report are ready to come to CNN and liven things up a bit with some not boring at all green news. Give us a call.
Or alternatively, CNN loves to cover natural disasters, so maybe we should just wait until there are so many disasters that it interests Jeff Zucker.
Oh, so you're not saying it'd be a natural disaster if you and I were on CNN?
Certainly not.
Thank you. Okay.
Meanwhile, like the Pope, President Obama was also focused on good stewardship of the earth this week when he signed a proclamation formally designating nearly 500,000 acres of land in southern New Mexico as the new Organ Mountains Desert Peaks National Monument.
More than 130 years ago, Billy the Kid took cover and literally left his mark inscribing his name into what we now know as Outlaw Rock. You can see it today, and I want to make sure that future generations can see it as well. And all of it supports the local economy and jobs in the region. So we're not just preserving history. Outdoor recreation at parks and forests and other public lands brings in tourism dollars. I've preserved more than 3 million acres of public lands for future generations, and I am not finished. So
there goes Obama, big government taking over all our public lands. Somebody call Cliven Bundy.
Now, national monument status will ensure that future generations can also see the Native American petroglyphs in that national monument. Cattle will still be allowed to graze there, but all drilling and fracking will be prohibited.
Land grabber. For much more on those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website, not CNN's, at greennews.bradblog.com. While you're there, please consider a donation to help the Green News Report stay on the air until we are hired by CNN. Find us on the Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been...
This is CNN.
No, this has been your Green News Report.
Where family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
Times like these you learn to live again. It's times like these you live again. It's times like these you learn to love again.
We've heard study after study, and we've talked here on the program numerous times about job stress, about depression, about not being happy with the job. In fact, not too long ago there was a study done that said, something like 70-80% of people are unhappy with the jobs that they have. So when because I get a lot of these solicitations saying, hey, we got somebody who wrote a book or has this great idea. Do you want to talk to them? And I saw this said, hey, 85% of people are unhappy with their jobs. Here's how you help, which is why I have asked Jackie Ruka, America's happyologist. She's here to share her views on how workers who are unhappy with their current job can increase their gross domestic happiness. Jackie, thanks for taking time for us.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So if we're unhappy with what we're doing for a living, how do we make it better? How do we stave off depression or the chronic stress of being overworked and all the things in today's workforce?
Well, that's all very good question. And first and foremost, most people are unhappy with their jobs because they are unhappy with their boss. So usually there's a communication breakdown and there's a lack of engagement in their work because they're not feeling fulfilled or appreciated.
Okay, and how do you suggest we change that?
Well, we can look at management because management needs improvement, and part of that improvement is showing more appreciation toward your employees, engaging them more in what's important to them and what it is that they're doing and how they could better serve their employee.
Wow, that would be a great idea. I don't think I've ever had a job, Jackie, where someone really gave a rat's behind of how I felt. It's just a matter of you do this or you're fired. That's kind of right. So the world that you're talking about would be fabulous.
Well, that world does exist in companies that are successful, like Google and Zappos and Pfizer. So these companies have taken on a happiness culture, and they have changed the way in which they have their managers work together with their employees. So it's not so much a he against she or me versus you. Everybody works as a team, and everybody listens and hears each other out as how they could better work together and improve productivity. And happier employees usually lead to higher productivity, which equal to heftier profits. And this is related to those people who are more engaged, and they focus more on their goals and goals that give them meaning.
Yeah.
So offering goals that supply meaning to your employees.
Interesting. When I hear Google and you throw that out there, the first thing that pops into my mind is the class action lawsuit that their employees filed against them for collusion to make it so they couldn't go anywhere else. So I've got to question the happiness factor with those folks.
Well, I think Google has, I don't know exactly what they've done with relation to their class action suit or how they've, moved forward with that, but they have made some changes in their HR. They've hired an outside organization, and they have offered other types of incentives that are actually changing absenteeism rate, and so absenteeism is less of a problem.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
No, because as I look at this, you use the HR. When I first started working, 25 odd years ago, we were workers. You were a person. Then somehow I don't know when it became human relations, or I don't remember when that happened, or labor relations. That basically took people all out of it, and so I don't know how by not recognizing that these are actually people. That you get to this happy place, which I'm all in favor of. I'm all in favor of workers and management, working together for a much happier, symbiotic kind of environment. I just don't know where that exists for most people.
Well, for most people nowadays, 2 out of 3 are unhappy in their jobs. So that's a lot of Americans.
It is.
That's over 70 million Americans who wake up every morning not wanting to go to work or dreading to go to work and really not engaging in work at all.
So then who do you blame for that? I mean, because, when you have that many people, it's generally not going to be the fault of the workers. And I have an idea of how we increase people's gross domestic happy. especially in the workplace. And that's empowering them to have some say. And for me, the best way to do that is through collective bargaining and organizing. By giving workers some power and some ability to have some say and some security, I think that's a way of increasing people's happiness on the job by feeling empowered that they have some say and that they are important and not disposable in like here in Pennsylvania, an at-will state.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, and you bring up a very good point. I think having more community type meetings once a week together as a company culture, if they encourage community meetings where people could voice suggestions or share things that may not be working, how they might be able to be more productive, and have managers hear people out and like you said, share more of a voice, then yes, the assembly line kind of mentality or feeling that employees are generally feeling can be dissipated. And yes, that sense of empowerment and that sense of gratitude, because everybody has a job, and having one bad job versus no job is actually better. However, depression-wise, people who are unfulfilled in their jobs have higher feelings of depression.
That's what drugs are for.
Well, well, hopefully, 1 out of 3 Americans are being diagnosed with depression every day. So this is an epidemic, and drugs alone is really not the answer. It's really turning our negative thinking around into positive thinking and doing some action steps in order to do this, like you said, have a sense of empowerment. And you have to start looking at your work-life balance, because people are working harder and longer, and it is not really about quantity anymore. It's about producing quality. But if people aren't producing quality work, then companies are not producing hefty profits. So we're getting it all backwards now. And success, people believe success leads to happiness, but in all reality, it's your happiness that now leads to success. And all the money in the world is not going to buy you happiness. The biggest asset that people have is their time, because you cannot buy your time back.
No, ask Steve Jobs. He couldn't buy that back. But I look at this and I hear what you're saying. But one of the things that caught my attention right there, you said hefty profits. Has this always been the way things have been done through our, at least from the post-industrial era forward, where we're looking at just hefty profits as bottom lines? Because I seem to go back and, you look to the 40s and the 50s and into the 60s where they had very small profit margins, much smaller than corporate America has today. And it never seems to be enough today. The bottom line is never enough. In fact, the guy from Caterpillar said it will never be enough. We'll always strive for more, and we're always going to strive to take more from workers because it pads our bottom line. So given that scenario, how can workers have some sense of happiness when they know that ultimately they're just a cost on a balance sheet?
Yeah, well, you bring up a couple of things. Gross domestic product since the 1950s has more than tripled. So what we are measuring is, basically production and consumption, but we're not really measuring volunteering or time with our friends and family or walking and exercise or the things that actually do equate to happiness. And gross domestic product has increased, but happiness has remained stagnant since as far back as the 1960s. And why is that? Because gross domestic product now measures things like oil spills and illness and death and the cost of divorce. And we know that as a nation of a high divorce rate, our gross domestic product shows that we are a healthy American organization and a healthy country because our GDP is up. But really, our GDP isn't up because we're a healthy nation. Our GDP is up because we're an unhealthy nation.
And dysfunctional.
And dysfunctional, right. So you mentioned ways in which we can improve upon this. And this is not just both in our thoughts, but in our actions, which empower us. And there's over a decade of science that the positive psychologists out there have dug deep, and they have found simple things like saving ordinary events in your day, the things that are positive in your day. Don't overlook them, but capitalize on them. Talk about them when you get home. Talk about what was good about your day. This encourages more goodness, and it encourages you to do more good, whether it's at work or talking to your neighbor or eating a healthy dinner. Those are all positive, good things. And the more you do that, the more you will continue that behavior. So it's a matter of retraining the brain, which retrains your actions for a healthier, happier lifestyle. And
so
putting
all of my friends who send me pictures of their of what they had for dinner on Facebook, they're practicing positive messaging and not telling me about that good for nothing who cut them off on the way home. Kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, it doesn't have to be related to Facebook, but it could be just, like I said, talking when you come home from work and sharing what was positive about your day instead of sharing about what was negative about your day. Because the more you share about the negative things, the more you continue to compound upon that, and you give more energy to it, which isn't going to make you feel any better.
Interesting.
So the more you
That makes sense. If I'm focusing on something negative, I will probably be negative. Interesting. You listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're with Jackie Ruka, America's happyologist. If you want to know more about Jackie, gethappyzone.com. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. That's gethappyzone.com. Just click on Jackie Ruka's name there at thericksmithshow.com. Take you right there. Some of the other things that you came up with that caught my attention that I thought were interesting. Avoid comparing yourself to others. Why isn't that the whole idea of competition? Isn't that what corporate America wants? Wants you to look across the table and say you're doing better than him, or you're not doing as good as him, and you need to work harder.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Americans have this potential to focus more on the external instead of focusing on the internal. When you focus on the external, then naturally there's always going to be somebody who makes more money than you. There's always going to be somebody who's prettier than you or smarter than you.
Well, that's
so
true.
if you continue focusing on the external, then you're going to be in a perpetual state of low self-esteem and negativity. So avoid those comparisons, because happiness is actually an inside job. So focusing on your own personal achievements instead of making comparison to others will better impact your happiness and your self-esteem. So if managers and bosses or CEOs want to improve the well-being of their employees, then they should focus more on sharing what is working and what we can be doing more of, and instead of focusing on we're losing money here and we're losing money there and we need to be doing this and we need to be doing that. When you focus more on what is working, then it becomes a reinforcement for employees to feel engaged in being a part of a team and wanting to, yes, improve upon what may not be working and use their talents, skills, and abilities to shine further with that type of organization.
Yeah, interesting. A couple other things you threw on the list. Put money low on the list. Set meaningful goals for yourself. Take initiative at work. Make friends, and treasure your family. All great ideas. But the one that caught my attention is this idea of faking it until you make it. That if I got to act happy, even if I'm miserable, and even if the guy I'm sitting next to I can't stand, I have to fake it. How do you get through that? Because I have never been good at faking it. If I don't like you, you pretty much know I don't like you.
Right. Yeah. Turning the frown upside down sometimes can be hard when you want to be authentic. And it doesn't mean you're not being authentic by turning your frown upside down. You actually are retraining your brain when you're smiling. When you're smiling, somebody's going to smile back at you. So already one happy person actually affects 1,000 within their space. So happiness is contagious. So that's really what that means, is your happiness can become contagious, and you can affect 1,000 people around you. And the quickest way to becoming happy is to be around happier people. So when you look at savoring and focusing on what's important and not focusing on negative things of the past, say you don't like this person because something they've done. Well, don't focus on the past. Just focus on right now.
I guess good advice. Sure, why not? One of the I'd like to go back to one thing that you said a moment ago. Not focusing on what other people make and comparisons. You brought up the CEO class, and I look at what's going on in Chicago today and yesterday, where fast food workers are kind of saying, hey, we would like to make a decent living. How do you tell folks who are making minimum wage, who are struggling to pay their bills, to be happy and not focus on what the guy who's making 1 million hours worth of wage more than they are? How do you get them not to focus on that? Would the journal, would the gratitude journal, would that work?
Yeah. Yes, a gratitude journal is very powerful. It gives you an opportunity to, one, detox the negative. I mean, instead of voicing it all the time, write it all out. This is a great way to get this out of your system and actually detox. And research reveals that people who write gratitude journals or gratitude letters add more significance in their life and have a lower score of depression and are higher on the happiness scale. So a gratitude journal and just writing down 3 things that you are grateful for each day actually is a very, very powerful to the human spirit, and it can actually change your mindset. So you may actually look forward to going to that $15 an hour job and be happy that you have a job.
Yeah, $15 an hour. The fast food workers, that's what they're asking for. Actually double what they are making. All great ideas, though. To be honest, when I read the stuff, I'm going, my first thought was it's always easy to blame the person who's being affected, but it doesn't sound like that's what you're doing.
No, I think, like I said, happiness is an inside job, and it takes practice. It takes practice to have positive thinking. It takes practice to make tweaks and changes in old behavior patterns or things that are no longer working for you on the job. So change them. You have the power. The biggest ability a human has is the power of choice. So you always have a choice.
I like that. And it actually does go right in line with what I've always been saying. We have the choice to stand together, and I'm a big fan of collective bargaining, and I'm organizing, and this sounds like it's right up the same aisle. Allie, again, Jackie Ruka, America's Happyologist, the website, gethappyzone.com. Lots of things there that Jackie has to offer for you. In fact, you could set up an appointment, a little schedule, right? You could get some personal time with you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Go to gethappyzone.com. I have a 30-minute complimentary introduction session. If you want to start your happiness journey, we can have a discussion about that. And if you want to learn about ways in which to empower yourself, my book comes out June 24th, Get Happy and Create a Kick Butt Life.
I can't wait for it. Jackie Ruka, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Again, gethappyzone.com. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back with your thoughts. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Let's review the rap sheet of Wall Street banks. Defrauding investors, cheating homeowners, money laundering, rigging markets, tax evasion, credit card ripoffs, and so sickeningly much more. At last, though, some of the cops on the bank beat seem to be having regulatory epiphanies. The New York Times reports that some financial overseers are questioning, quote, whether such misdeeds are not the work of a few bad actors, but rather a flaw that runs through the fabric of the banking industry. Regulators are starting to ask, is there something rotten in bank culture? Really? Where have they been? Millions of everyday Americans sniffed out that rot back in 2007 at the start of the Wall Street collapse and nauseating bailout. Imagine how pleased they are that it took only 7 years for the stench of bank rot to reach the tender nostrils of authorities. Still, even slow progress is progress. Both the head of the New York Fed and the comptroller of the currency are at least grasping one basic reality, namely, that the tightened regulations enacted to deal with a too-big-to-fail issue do nothing about the fundamental ethical collapse among America's big bankers. The problem is that, again and again, Wall Street's culture of greed is rewarded. Bank bosses preside over gross illegalities, are not punished, pocket multi-million-dollar bonuses despite their shoddy ethics, and blithely proceed to the next scandal. More restraint on bank processes miss a core fact. Banks don't engage in wrongdoing. Bankers do. As Comptroller Tom Curry says, the approach to this problem is not to call in more lawyers. It's more like a priest-penitent relationship. This is Jim Hightower saying, public shaming can be useful, but it should include actual punishment of the top bosses. Take away their bonuses, fire a few of them, and prosecute them.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown. From Wall Street to Washington, this monthly newsletter reveals who's doing what to whom and why. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
Just when you thought it was safe, those crazy Republicans are at it again. It's time for the Rick Smith Show's Conservative Alerts.
I got to do it a third day in a row. I just have to. I just cannot let it go. Todd Yoo-hoo, yo-ho, ho-ho-ho. I know. The founding, I don't know who said it, but I know the founding fathers. The founding fathers said if you give someone the right to vote and they're uneducated, it's just as dangerous as giving someone a loaded gun. Same thing. Yeah. I got an email from Carl during the break on our conversation with Jackie Ruku. And look, I get it. You know, she's writing a book. Got some stuff that's interesting to her. You know, this idea that we can make ourselves happy, very self-helpy. And if you're into it, God bless you. You know, it's good stuff for you. I'm not against it. I'm very much in the line of empowering people, which I think is a good thing. And she wasn't against that. But Carl simply writes WTF. And I'm sorry, Carl. I thought it would be an interesting conversation, and it was. She was a good sport, even though I think she sensed I was a little skeptical of the gross domestic happiness, because I do believe that you can increase your happy by being empowered. And what's interesting to me is all of these fast food workers, and the reason I brought that up is because all of these fast food workers that I've talked to, this empowerment that they feel, this control that they feel, this taking a portion of their life, actually has made them quite happy. And I go back to the old Samuel Gompers, the old AFL back at the turn of the century call. 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. And, you know, she's not off base. And, you know, there's almost nothing I disagree with. Having the ability to sit down and to read, to write, to be able to do something that is of enjoyment, treasuring your family, being able to spend quality time with your family, yeah, right, I'm on board. Good stuff. But, you know, thinking that the boss cares, I'm not going there. And it was interesting she brought up Google, because Google the workers filed a class action lawsuit saying, hey, the collusion, not good. The collusion is bad for us. Please stop doing it. And it's one of those things that just, you know, grabbed my attention, made me think just a little bit differently. So, is what it is. But I like that. Increase your happy. Increase your gross domestic happiness. I kind of like, it's got a nice ring to it, doesn't it? In the gratitude journal, something I never thought of. Write down all the things you're happy about. It reminds me of a friend of mine. He used to collect people's misery. You know, people say, hey, how you doing? And he'd tell me about it. And as he was there, you know, their free psychiatrist, their sounding board, he said, you know, at the end of it, I felt better about myself because my problems weren't as bad as theirs, which is kind of twisted, don't you think? I mean, just on some level, a little twisted. Anyway, if you missed any portion of the program, thericksmithshow.com. questions, comments, something on your mind, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I do answer all emails personally. Going to take a quick break, right back with Hour 3. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Together, we can make America better. The Rick Smith Show. It's The Rick Smith Show on Country Gold Radio, WIOO Carlisle, and WEEO Shippensburg.
You're listening to Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Rather than face the protests and hear the voices of its workers, McDonald's Corporation Wednesday closed and cleared its corporate headquarters in Illinois. The workers brought their fight for $15 an hour and a union to the corporate headquarters, where McDonald's is holding its annual shareholders meeting. About 100 workers sat down, risking arrest and a civil disobedience action. Emmanuel Gonzalez was one of the workers risking arrest.
I'm sitting here in front of the McDonald's Corporation, where we are doing a civil protest for the Fight for 15. There is no one arrested yet, but we have already been told that it's possible for others to be arrested. I'm in front of the McDonald's Corporation with 1,000 plus people. We are protesting against McDonald's because they do not pay us a fair wage of $15 an hour, which is what we are requesting. And we have already been told that we are possibly going to be arrested.
Fight for 15 spokesperson Nasli Damasio says that McDonald's shutting down its corporate headquarters to avoid the worker protesters is a testament to the power of the fast food worker movement.
I think it just shows how much power this movement has. And instead of McDonald's playing games and shutting down headquarters, they should just listen to the demands of these workers and pay them a living wage because they're not struggling in poverty.
But the very time when more people are using public transit systems are struggling for money. It is an absolute no-brainer for Congress to refund the highway bill, which of course includes money for transit programs. It's a no-brainer. There's not going to be safe, affordable public transportation in the United States of America without the refunding of the bill.
Transport Workers Union Local 100 President John Samuelson, TWU, is urging substantial investment in public transit.
If there's any message that we want to get across, it's that, send money, pump money, invest money into public transit. It's good for American citizens, it's good for American workers, and it's good for the American economy.
Michigan's building and construction trade unions are contributing at least $3 to $5 million to a fund to help cover retiree benefits in the Detroit bankruptcy grand bargain. Republican Michigan House Speaker Jace Bolger demanded that unions fork over cash before the legislature approves the deal. The legislature must approve $195 million of an overall $816 million package for Detroit to help the city emerge from bankruptcy. The money is an effort to mitigate pension cuts for 32,000 Detroit public workers while preventing the sell-off of Detroit's Art Museum collection. Some foundations in the Detroit Institute of the Arts are pledging the bulk of the $816 million over 20 years. The National Labor Relations Board says that the American Postal Workers Union has a right to seek details on a pilot program of privatization that the Postal Service is conducting in the Midwest. The Postal Service had resisted sharing that information with the union, claiming those programs are exempt from the union contract requiring disclosure. You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I've been standing here waiting, Mr. Postman, so patiently. But just a card or just a letter saying she'll be coming home to me.
Well, the sad reality is now that the Republicans have taken Benghazi away from Darrell Issa and the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, now that Benghazi's off the table, the post office is in the crosshairs of a very angry Darrell Issa. And if you're waiting for that letter, Issa is going to make it much, much more difficult. In fact, today, as I understand, House Resolution 4670 passed his committee by an 18-13 vote called, and you got to love this. I always love the names. The names they come up with are so nice, so soft, so reassuring. The Secure Delivery for America Act. Because, it's got to be everything that it's going to not be, at least in the name, so that you have some false sense of security, right? I mean, you got to give them credit for at least that. But here's my problem. this is really another step towards destroying our post office and eventually privatizing in what will be one of the most massive land thefts. Well, I mean, the Indians are going to be looking at it going, wow, that was pretty good. Which is why I've asked Omar Gonzalez. He's the Western Region Coordinator for the American Postal Workers Union, APWU. Omar, thanks for taking time for us.
By all means, Rick. Thank you.
So I look at this, first, to me, this is Issa, a little chafed in the backside, having had Benghazi taken from him. So he's got to go after something, and I guess you guys are it.
Well, frankly, you got it right on the name. It's a ridiculous name. It sounds good, for America and all this other stuff, but actually, what it's doing, it's taking away the delivery service that we've had since 1861. 1861. The ISA wants to have 1.5 million addresses and mailboxes converted into cluster boxes. And that kind of a bill would actually lead to a different kind of cluster. But we'll talk about that, I guess, some other day. But it's piecemeal privatization of the Postal Service is what it is. It's eliminating services. It's ISA's effort before he loses that chairpersonship, and to basically take service away from the American public so that the Postal Service becomes irrelevant. It makes no sense. And there's things in the bill that, nobody's thinking about it. It's going to cost money to build and manufacture these boxes. It's going to cost money to place them somewhere. Somebody's going to give up some property, and who knows where they might end up. They might end up in a Sears store, a Staples store, down 2 miles down the road. The plan is ridiculous, and it's intended, again, to destroy the American public's confidence in the Postal Service.
Well, when I looked at it, my first thought was, and you brought up Staples, my first thought was we're going back to the old general store where everybody from town goes to get their mail from this one place. And, of course, it's a huge draw for whichever store gets it, because while you're there, you might pick something up. It seems like a great profitized idea instead of just being the service that it's supposed to be.
Well, you're absolutely right. It's taking us back to the 1700s when Americans had to go to specific locations, sometimes even ships, to pick up their mail. Definitely taking us back. And the other thing that people, I'm sure a lot of people see what ISA is actually doing. But, I actually listened to the hearing, and he says that people living in homes built in the 1940s are begging to have cluster boxes. I wonder how much that rich congressman went down and actually spoke to anybody living in a house built in 1940. It's ridiculous. And then they made references to, with like the garbage service. You take your can to the street. You can't compare that. And if you want services that somebody can come inside your house and pick it up, but that makes absolutely no sense in regards to America's Postal Service. I mean, it is a service. It's been around for a long, long time. 1775.
And it's constitutional.
It's relatively new. Yeah, that's right. It's in the Constitution, the Articles of Confederation. I mean, it has helped establish the United States. Zip codes were made so that mail could be delivered to your home in the community. So we have streets, sidewalks, and signs and whatnot in order to be able to deliver the mail. So ISA, it's amazing. I was so disgusted to see the proceedings going on and the amendments. I mean, they were all mushy, gentlemen yields and my friends and thank yous and whatnot. A love fest for a bunch of cutthroats. But basically, ISA going around saying that it's only going to cost $73 to install these boxes. $73, even if it does cost $73 times 15 million, is a lot of money.
Well, who pays that?
Well, that's the $1 million question. Who pays it?
Am I going to have to pay $73? Am I going to have to pay $73 to put a box somewhere that I'm going to have to drive to get my mail?
It should not be, and there's been amendments, and you have to listen to the amendments very carefully because it sounds like, well, maybe the Americans won't have to pay that. The citizens won't have to pay that. But then even the disabled people are going to have to put in vouchers to be an excuse so that you can have delivery. And if you want your mail delivered, you're going to have to pay a delivery tax. Now, here's ISA, supposedly the champion of, people that don't want to pay taxes, imposing a tax on delivery. That is insane. And everybody should see it for what it is. Piecemeal privatization of the Postal Service. It absolutely makes no sense. ISA claims, hey, 91 million Americans don't get door-to-door service, so all the other 36 million should not get it either. And he wants to run it as a business, but it actually just turns out to be a bunch of monkey business. It's really a shame what they're trying to do to the institution of the United States Postal Service. It's America's post office. It does not belong to ISA.
Yeah, I'm with you. But I want to go back to that $73 for a second, because I'm starting to think about this. The wheels are starting to turn. One way or another, I'm going to pay for this, and I'm not going to get the service. And now you're saying on top of me not getting the same service I'm getting now, I'm going to probably have to pay $73 one way or another. Pay me now, pay me later, however, to put a box somewhere else, and then I'm going to have to pay a delivery fee on top of that if I want. This is insane.
It's ridiculous. And, there's some mailers that are basically, for this, because they say, well, it's not going to slow up the frequency of the mail and whatnot. What they don't consider, and what a lot of people don't realize or don't want to realize, is that direct mail is actually the best way to advertise. And these major mailers who say, it's not nothing wrong with sending these things to the cluster boxes, those direct mail is not going to reach America's households. So what's going to happen is somebody's, just either discard it, or the situation is, hey, I'm not even going to drive for my mail today. I'm a little tired. And it stays for 2 or 3 days instead of having day in and day out good old American postal service delivered to your home as the people who were around in 1861 were wise enough to provide. Here it is that ICE comes all these years later and says, you know what? Now it has to go because we got to run it like a business. It's losing billions of dollars. The Postal Service does not lose money. It's taken away. And now there were several amendments that were attempted in order to stop this pre-funding 75 years into the future, and he would not entertain it. He said it wasn't germane. It's all germane. It's all about the bottom line. It's all about money when it comes right down to it. And the American public deserves no more and no less than the Postal Service delivering their mail every single day the way they've done for so many years.
Yeah, I see. Because what we hear, Omar, is we hear the mainstream drumbeat message. Well, the internet has hurt the post office. It's not what it used to be. It's losing money. We need to modernize it. So modernizing, evidently, in ISA land is wasting a whole bunch of money, be it taxpayer money or citizens' money, to build boxes and tax them and for worse service. And to me, that doesn't seem modern.
Absolutely not. The Postal Service is a $67 billion quasi-government agency. It makes money. It made money last quarter. And then, of course, it was pumped into the media that we lost $1.5 billion. I mean, it's actually just simply a drive to lie to the American public, to take away their community post offices, and to have them pay more for services that the government can provide at a reasonable price. There is no tax money going into the post office to make it operational. It's paid by the ratepayers, and they deserve the service that they've been accustomed to. And people say, oh, you know what? Only 38% of Americans even use the post office. I don't know where they came up with that figure, but even 38% of 313 million people, it's a lot of people.
Still 100 million people.
That's right. That still use it. 3.2 million people use the post office, go into a post office every single day. And to say that it's dying, it's dead, no, they actually want to kill it. And ISIS's plan now is to slice it inch by inch so that it bleeds to death. So he's taking these piecemeal bills and calling them silly things like, security for America's mail and all this other nonsense, when actually what he's trying to do is to turn it over to his corporate friends.
I know where they got
Go ahead.
I know where they got the numbers. He pulled them right out of Rumpistan. Because it's like where you get most of those kind of numbers, where nobody has any clue of where they came from. You just reach back and pop out a number, and there it is. And then our mainstream stenographer media just keeps regurgitating it so that the average citizen goes, well, that must be what it is. It's on the decline. We should privatize it. And for me, Omar, when I look at this, I see the property and the land that is owned by the Postal Service, and I go, to me, the bigger part of this, and the question is this just a massive land theft deal? Is this just an opportunity to take land that belongs to we the people and hand it over to private interests?
Absolutely. The post office built in the 30s and 40s were meant to be majestic. They were meant to be the federal government presence in the community. They're fantastic. The artwork in there was, you had artists that were contracted to come in because Americans couldn't afford to go to a museum, art museum. So the art was put into these walls and stuff. And here they are, turning it over and selling them at dirt cheap. I mean, under the Freedom of Information Act, we had to pursue the Postal Service and the Postmaster General say, how much are you actually selling these offices for? What are they assessed for? He says, oh, that's proprietary. We can't give out that information. We come to find out that they're selling them, cheap, very cheap. They're assessed at $299 million. They're selling for $180 million. Things of that nature. And they're selling them to themselves. The company that they've hired, the CBLS, to sell these things is now selling it to their own clients. So it's a rape is what it is.
And there's no surprise there. So what do we do? I mean, this push towards putting post offices in staples and this push towards what does the average citizen do? I mean, we're inundated with the message that the post office is in trouble, even though we both know it's not. We both know it's stable for generations to come. And oh, by the way, produces good quality, solid middle class standard of living kind of jobs for hundreds of thousands of people in our country. What's the average person to do?
Well, what we got to do now is to make sure, now that it's come out of committee, that it does not go any further in the House. Now, it's by party line. That's how it's being voted. But even some good Americans who are Republicans, contact your Republican congressman. Make sure that they do not sell off the post office. Make sure they don't degrade service. Contact them. There's one thing that we can't compete with as far as money with the corporations, but we've got the votes. We've got the people. If the American people rise up and say, this is the United States Postal Service, it belongs to the American people, they'll listen. It's an election year. They will listen. You make sure you hound your congressman. You tell them, I don't want my post office packet. I don't want cluster boxes. And they'll vote that way because they need the vote. And everybody should do it. And of course, you call them, you talk to them, send them a letter while you're at it, too, and send it first-class mail.
There you go.
Send it to their field office. Send it to the field office, because if you send it to Washington, D.C., they're afraid of some poisons in the mail, and they might eradicate it. It might take a month to get there. And they say, oh, look at the delayed mail. But frankly, send it to the field office. Those letters count more than anything else. That they get letters, and they get a whole bunch of letters. They'll say, okay, that's this. And through the Postal Service to top it all off, it'll make a difference. America must get mad that they're trying to take away the institution to help found and bind this country together.
So last question I've got for you. Let's say you call there and they say, well, our position is it's failing and we need to do something about it. What's the response back to them? What does Omar tell his relatives when something like that pops up?
Well, let me tell you, first of all, if it didn't make money, people wouldn't want to privatize it and get into the business. Pitney Bowes, just Pitney Bowes. While we're closing plants, Pitney Bowes is building them. The mail, they're building mail equipment. The mail is a vibrant ways of communication. It may not be the way it used to be in the early 60s and 70s, but it is still a viable means of communication, especially advertisement. And you can't text a parcel, but it's a $67 billion quasi-government corporation agency that makes money, made money last quarter, continues to make money, has made money ever since 2012, getting out of the Grand Recession. It is not dying. And show me the stats where it's actually dying. First-class mail is going down. Is it really? It's actually stable. Parcels are up 8%. I mean, the mail business is a thriving business. And you see all these little companies trying to take over. What's going to happen is you're going to go like Canada Post, privatizing 58% increase in postage right off the bat. You can't have that in America. The United States Postal Service is United States Postal Service. It belongs to the people.
I'm with you. Again, I think you hit the main point there. 58% increase. I think that's what they really want. Because, hey, I can send, I think it was like 50 cents to send an envelope from one side of the country to the other.
That's right. It's actually a little cheaper than that right now. Yes.
I don't know how you do it.
To $1.40, $1.80, and you'd have to shop around for. It's like the phone company. They dismantled the AT&T one out. You had to call 3-4 different phone companies to get a phone. And well, of course, now you got help. But I'm going to leave you with this. They liken we don't need a delivery because milk used to be delivered door to door, and now you have to go to the store to buy it. What has milk got to do with the United States Postal Service? It is so involved and entwined in the economy of the United States. You can't compare a bunch of milk duds with the Postal Service.
I'm with you. And I just to leave it at this, I say use the Nancy Reagan quote for something that actually works. Just say no. Pretty simple.
That's right.
Omar Gonzalez,
That's right.
I appreciate you taking time for us. Always great talk with you. Keep up the fight. I'd love to talk to you again real soon as this moves down the road.
Thank you, Rick. We need people like you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Quick break. Back with your thoughts. 1-888-520-RICK. 1-888-520-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
We gotta get organized. We gotta do it today. No more madness than you. No more misery. We gotta get organized.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
It's time for The World in 2 minutes. I'm your host, Luke Vargas, reporting for Talk Radio News Service at the United Nations in New York. Here at the UN this morning, Security Council vetoes from China and Russia sunk an effort to refer Syria to the International Criminal Court, the fourth time Russia's blocked action on Syria since 2011. Here's Russia's Vitaly Churkin explaining the veto.
The draft resolution rejected today reveals an attempt to use the ICC to further inflame political passions and lay the groundwork, in the end, for eventual outside military intervention.
U.S. Ambassador Samantha Power disagreed, saying Russia wanted to prevent Syrians from testifying about their government.
It is important for us here today to hear the kind of testimony we might have heard if Russia and China had not raised their hands to oppose accountability for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
The ICC may not hear the case of Syria, but observers say it's the Security Council that's more at risk of atrophy due to the impasse among its members. Simon Adams leads the Global Center for the Responsibility to Protect.
It's really interesting to see how many ambassadors of the Security Council from elected countries have today raised the issue of voluntary restraint on the use of the veto, on the need for reform of the Council.
And the Thai military seizes power after a day of failed political negotiations. But even if the army can maintain order, as it's attempted in 12 previous coups since 1932, there's a lot of work to be done to put Thailand on the right path. Protesters say the ruling Shinawatra family manipulates the electoral process, offering handouts to poor farmers in exchange for votes. So, instead of calling for fresh elections, they want to see reform first. Can the army govern Thailand better than its caretaker or interim government? Only time will tell. For more global news headlines, visit talkradio.news.com.
Hey there, fellow working class heroes. I have some great news. You can now get the Rick Smith Show podcast on your iPhone, Android, BlackBerry, or Palm on demand and on the go. Get your class war to go by downloading the Stitcher app on your smartphone by going to Stitcher.com and search for The Rick Smith Show, or go to our website at thericksmithshow.com and click on our Stitcher button. Together we can, and we will rebuild a prosperous working class and leave opportunity for our children.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Where family values are more than slogans. The Rick Smith Show.
All because the gays are getting married, that is why people die and children go unfed. When I'm sad and alone, and I'm wondering just why everything about my life is feeling like it's going down a toilet bowl. It's good to know it's caused the gays.
Yeah. It's all their fault. That's right. So next week when I go on vacation, it's all their fault. Yeah. I mean, why not blame everything? Blame everything on people who have no no possible way of defending themselves. And isn't that the best? Isn't that the best part of it? To go and blame folks who have absolutely no way of having any say. It's what we do to a lot of groups, especially low-wage workers. It's easy to go after them, and it's easy to kick them while they're down. Yeah. Anyway, today was Harvey Milk Day. If you don't know who Harvey Milk was, he was the first openly gay person ever to be elected to public office. San Francisco, 1978. In fact, he was elected in 1978, and he was assassinated that same November. And you look at this and you go, how insane have we gotten as a society? And I guess it's the same as things have been. Just a lot of insanity. In fact, it was the person who had assassinated him was a former supervisor himself. And it was that obsession. It's the gays, it's their fault. So good. Today was the Harvey Milk Day, and they rolled out a stamp. I thought it was interesting having our conversation about the Postal Service. Every year, evidently, they choose a number of, they have a committee of citizens who, go through thousands of proposals, and they pick out a number of ideas and people that they want to commemorate with a stamp. And this year it was Harvey Milk. And it's, my wife said, it's odd that, a lot of this, we're seeing a lot of this different stuff, be it on TV, being at the stamp, be it who knows what, around same-sex marriage. And it seems like it's all kind of planned. And I said, well, the stamp thing is months in the making, not something that just popped up, but it is kind of interesting how things all kind of come together. And you can be conspiratorial about it and say, well, they're planning it all as a grand plot, or you can just say, you know what, as a society, we're waking up. As a society, we're saying, enough already. What I find very interesting is, do you know who we haven't heard anything from? Not one word from Rick Santorum. Not one single solitary syllable about Santorum. And why? Judge John E. Jones III, who said that we're better people than these laws represent, and it's time to discard them into the ash heap of history, was actually appointed by George W. Bush and pushed heavily for by Rick Santorum. So interestingly enough, we haven't heard a peep out of the Santorum camp about this decision. And I find it interesting that, the guy who, and maybe he's starting to realize that this issue has moved beyond him. But I just find it interesting that Tricky Ricky, the guy who said, well, if we do it, people will start marrying dogs. Remember that? Remember that jewel that came out of the Santorum camp? It's going to lead to bestiality. Very, very interesting stuff. So I know Tricky Ricky and his, I forget the name of the group, Patriot Voices or something like that. It's the way he's going to make his money, and he's going to make a bunch of money because I'm sure that they're going to roll. I'm sure they're figuring out what the best way to use this is going to be, what the best way to be able to profit from it, the way it's going to be. I'm sure they're working on their game plan, because look, it isn't over. I've had a lot of people say, well, it's over, it's done. It's not over. With crazy people, it's never over. It's not over until they pass on. This is not going to be over for a generation or two. It's going to take my kids and my grandkids before this is no longer an issue. And for people like Santorum, that's got to scare the living bejesus out of them. But I find it interesting that in 2002, confirmed by the Senate, by Santorum, who described him as highly qualified to assume the important role of judge and the duty of protecting the Constitution and ensuring the effective operation of our judicial system. That's what Santorum had to say about Judge Jones, who said that these laws need to be on the trash heap of history. Can anyone say awkward? I just did. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
We want the world and we want it now. We're going to take it anyhow. We want the airwaves.
Not right wing, just right. The Rick Smith Show.
Stay alive.
Hour day is the standard, but it wasn't always this way. The original American workday was from sunup to sundown, following the demands of an agricultural workday. Over time, the nation became more industrialized and workers moved from individually owned, self-sufficient farms to factories, taking workers from their homes and families. Factory owners demanded the agricultural sunup to sundown workday, forcing workers to toil long hours in grueling conditions. Organized in pursuit of more time for family, education, and recreation. The cry of 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will grew louder. For a century, the 8-hour day was viewed as the holy grail of the labor movement, and for this hallowed vision, workers sacrificed, often with their blood and their lives. The first strike for shorter hours occurred in May of 1791 in the city of Philadelphia, where carpenters protested a day's wages, paying the same in January as was paid for a longer day in July. Chicago in 1886 was home to one of the largest showings of solidarity. Some 80,000 workers turned out to support the 8-hour cause. It was in Chicago's Haymarket Square that a terrorist bomb and the blazing guns of company-paid police cost policemen and numerous workers their lives and their blood. As a result of the Haymarket tragedy, 8 innocent men were tried and convicted for a crime they did not commit. 4 of the men were hung. The Haymarket Square tragedy was but one of many battles in which working men, women, and children shed blood, tears, and flesh in the pursuit of 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will. This Rick Smith Show Labor History Moment was made possible by a grant from the Labor Education Center at IUP. For more information, visit www.thericksmithshow.com.
The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
So this is an interesting story I came across. Turns out one of the Utah legislators, a Republican named Paul Ray, state legislator, thinks it would be more humane to bring back the good old days of the firing squad. According to him, you can't trust those needles. You can't trust the drugs since we can't get them, and we still want to be killing people. So the firing squad, according to him, much more humane. And look, other states have tried it. I think Wyoming and Missouri, they threw the idea out there. Some believe that Utah may actually have a shot, since they've already had a tradition of firing squads. You may remember Joe Hill. When we did the labor history tour, we went to Sugar House Park there, where Joe Hill was executed for a crime that now we find out he didn't commit. But again, that's another one of those moments where I go, the death penalty is permanent. But they did up until a couple of years ago. They lined up 5 policemen with 30 caliber Winchester rifles, and they executed this Ronnie Lee Gardner back in 2010. Now here's the thing that gets me. According to the legislator, the prisoner dies instantly. It's like, bang, you're dead. It's over. It's like on TV. You get shot, you fall over, it's dead, painless. He says it may sound draconian, it may sound really bad, but the minute the bullet hits your heart, you're dead. There is no suffering. And I started thinking about this. 5 cops lined up shooting at one guy. How many times have we seen these news stories, especially from places like Florida, where 20, 30, 40 cops shoot 80, 100, 150 bullets, and they hit the guy in the foot? Just a thought. Just my thought. I got a better idea. Instead of firing squad, why don't we just bring back the guillotine? That we know works first time, right? So just very, very bizarre. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world and in Washington, D.C. I got Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you. Like Alberto Gonzalez, he liked waterboarding. Let him do it himself.
There you go. Let's do it to him. So, are we pro firing squad?
Me?
Yeah, you. Are we in favor of firing squads? Bring that back. Maybe like halftime during the football game, some entertainment.
Well, it would help solve the unemployment rate, I guess. If you had to hire all those people, to shoot. Is that maybe the motive? Maybe it was economic on that state.
Yeah, I would figure there would be a lot of yahoos who'd want to volunteer for that until they actually did it.
That's true.
And that's the sad thing about this. I mean, the reality is we're going backwards. We're devolving as a society, I think, in some vein.
Well, he must be way out there.
Well, I know a lot of people who think we should just be lining people up and shooting them. And I said, when we start going after bankers, then you might get me.
People say, well, somebody sold some drugs, and put them away for 50 years, and maybe they did an offense that's worth 4 years. But people, go get them until you try to see how you're going to pay for that and what you do to society. Like the war in Iraq, go get them, and then look what happened.
Yeah, until it's them. Until it's them on the hot seat. I don't know. Have you've been following this Benghazi committee?
Yeah.
Did you see the statement today by Alan West?
No.
The former congressman from Florida, speaking about Tammy Duckworth.
What did he say? What on earth could he say about Tammy?
Well, this is a woman who lost both legs and one of her arms fighting in Iraq. Yeah. He said, Tammy Duckworth, I just don't know where her loyalties lie. For her to have been a veteran and a wounded warrior for the United States Army, she should know that this is not the right thing, and hopefully she will remember the oath of office that she took as an Army officer, and not the allegiance I guess she believes she has to the liberal progressives of the Democratic Party. He just doesn't know where her loyalties lie.
Well, he doesn't even know what she's going to say yet. Tammy Duckworth, I was asked today, and of course, there's several of those members, most of them that I personally know because I served with them. But, the one person, you can make speculation about if somebody is liberal or conservative or whatever you want to do, but the one that, everybody resoundingly has a lot of respect for is Tammy Duckworth. I mean, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it was a very bizarre thing for him to say. Basically just questioning her loyalty to the country after giving both legs and an arm. I guess there are no depths.
Well, why are they quoting him? I'm just a little curious.
Well, because he's the one on fake news all the time. I mean, he's the one who's out there blathering on.
Okay. I wonder why they quoting.
And that's his gig. I mean, the reality is his gig is to stir up controversy, to get people to tune in. It's just this bizarre kind of feeding frenzy that some people like him and Palin and the rest of them are very good at.
Especially Palin, she's turned that into an economic boom,
And so is he. I mean, to be honest with you, he's got to be making a pretty buck doing it too. It's just I don't know. Anyway, let's move along. Let's find out. Talk about some really important issues like the NSA. Well, they gonna stop spying on us?
Well, the House bill received overwhelming support, but. And there's the big but to it. A lot of people who supported it said, like Congresswoman Schenkowski said that, you don't want to ruin the good with the perfect. In other words, it has a lot of flaws. But when I first, saw it, I knew that there were some things that were not right in the sense that the NSA is happy because now they actually have access to more mobile phone records than they did previously, which is, not necessary. And they've even been bold enough to say that. But the problem with this bill is that it's been watered down. Mike Rogers, the Republican chair of Intel, is a hawk, period, on this issue, period. He doesn't think the NSA has done anything wrong. And, so he went along with the bill. Hopefully, the Senate, this is a very difficult bill, complicated bill, and hopefully the Senate will be able to take some time on it. And I mention that because a lot of people, Rick, on the Hill today, a few people that I talked to said, look, this thing's been lingering around. Nobody's done anything about it. The president made a statement. Finally, all this time later, they're doing something about it. And they're doing it, right within the grasps of the election. So hopefully, unlike the Patriot Act, The Senate will take some time and make this a better bill and send it back to the House. But it's a watered-down version. Is it better than nothing? Yes. But they stripped the advocate out. There was going to be a public advocate that would have been able to, have a give and take with the FISA court. That was stripped out. That's gone.
Yeah, we don't want anybody challenging the FISA court. We don't want anybody knowing what's going on. And the part of this, you lost me right at the NSA's happy. As soon as you said that, well, I got a problem with it right now.
They actually get somehow in this bill, they get more access to mobile calls than they had previously somehow. So that really doesn't make sense in itself. Again, probably better to start a vehicle along the path. I would assume if the Senate puts some changes in there, good tough changes for civil liberties, and it gins up enough, as we say, maybe before the election, it will force enough votes, to actually go back and somehow pass through the House, through the conference.
But because I look at this and I go, if we're giving them more rights, this is how things usually work, and this is why people become very cynical of DC and of politicians in general. They're going to come out and say, "Oh, we've toughened civil liberties and we've strengthened your rights," while giving the NSA more access to things. I don't see how you can do both, but that's usually how things work out.
Now they do have an 18-month. The NSA has to go through the phone records, and they're held 18 months, and then they have to have a reason to search, through them. That, I guess, is one positive. Overall, if you had to rate the bill, it would be a 50-50, a 5 out of 10. Quote, better than nothing, but a lot of work could be done on this bill. One of the problems, Rick, I think, just from trying to take the temperature of several staffers that I know over the past months, 6-7 months, there has not been a huge public outcry. There's been an outcry by civil liberties groups and by, groups that care about rights, but there has not been an outcry by the general population. Some of the people have bought into, this is how we catch the Osamas.
Yeah. Oh, and it's not me.
To do all this.
And it's not me. And that's the thing that until it's them, until they go, what? They were looking at me? That's when people start paying attention. And I think the vast majority of people, one, have tuned out. I think people are just tired of all the bickering and they've just kind of tuned out. But two, don't believe it can happen to them.
Well, that's true. And, again, the Patriot Act was the same way. It was sold during a period of terror. It was sold as something that had to be. And the idea of the Patriot Act to be able to, beef up intelligence was correct. But the actual result, where they could even go in and look at your pay-per-view, what do they have to know what you or I or your listeners watch on pay-per-view to fight Osama bin Laden? I mean, really.
It's insane.
But that's where that bill went. So, hopefully it's a beginning.
Yeah, and they all, if I remember the Patriot Act as well, they wanted to know what I was reading at the library and all of that stuff, and my medical records and all kind of stuff that you go, I don't know. Because I don't know that there are many books at the library, or at least my local public library, on how to make nuclear weapons.
Right. And then, people can go on the internet, and the libraries became the tool for the whole thing, and they had to really spy on their patrons.
But don't you think, at the end of the day, I think most people have gone, they're watching everything. It's all out there. Because I know some of my younger friends, people who are under 30, they don't believe in privacy. They believe it's everything's out in the open, so it doesn't really bother them that Big Brother's watching. They seem to be, at least the people that I know, they expect it, and they seem to be okay with it.
Well, and the thing they don't grasp is prosecutorial abuse. And, I just saw a case yesterday of, believe it or not, a man found a lost cat, took care of it, contacted the owner when he saw an ad, and he ended up getting arrested and jailed for 20 hours for theft. The DA pursued him.
Wow.
Now, that's not an isolated case. There are prosecutorial abuses, and sure there are good ones too, but they're out there. And if one opens a law up wide enough, that paintbrush can be pretty wide, and people think, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to fear. Well, That's not necessarily accurate.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I keep seeing all of these child porn things, and my mind automatically goes to suspicion now that we find that everything is hackable. There is nothing secure. I mean, every time I turn around, someone's saying, well, you better change your passwords because what you had with us, well, it all got stolen months ago. So
eBay.
Yeah, eBay's the latest one. I mean, but you know how many times my credit card's been changed this year? I've had 4 new credit cards this year from the same credit card company saying, hey, we got this report that all of your numbers are out with who knows where, so we're changing the cards. My bank, I got to do the exact same thing because how I deposit my money into the bank account, well, somehow the check company got cashed. Who knew? That's just nuts. Let's go on. Syria. What's going on in Syria?
Well, there was a UN vote today, a very dramatic, really thought-out vote. Over 60-some countries supported it, where they were going to go to the International Tribunal with criminal, war crime cases, and it was going to be not just against officials within the current Syria government, but also against the quote militants or the freedom fighters, whatever they want to call themselves, who were opposed to the regime, also for abuses by them. So it was a pretty fair, balanced resolution. Russia said no, brought China along with it, and of course can veto anything that comes, through that, with it being on the Security Council. The original headlines were, that all these countries were on, and this would embarrass Russia. I don't think Russia is in a position where it can be embarrassed by anything.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't think they care.
No, so it was just status quo. It totally just. It really brings up a question about one person being able to veto something because they're a member of the Security Council. It raises that issue,
It's always raised that issue for me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've always asked that question. How is it the entire world can be in favor of something, but one country says no, and sometimes it's us?
Correct. That's correct.
I mean, that's the other part of this. Sometimes we're the ones standing in the way of everything else. And I've often asked that question: how is it that one country can stop everything? And I guess it just shows the weakness of this body.
Yes, I mean, there's a lot of people that have felt that the UN needs an overhaul of some type, but I thought this would have been, if it would have made it, would have been a good statement. It would have maybe possibly, had some repercussions in Syria, so that some of the hideous things that have been done might have been curtailed a bit.
Well, we will see where that leads us next. Thailand, another coup going on? What's going on?
I actually talked to a friend of mine today in Thailand, and a person that used to work for me, and he was like, okay, and it matches with the news article. There's been a coup. The military's taken over, but the tourists are functioning, and the businesses are functioning. They've been a coup-prone country. Normally when you hear coup, it's like, wow. And as my friend said to me today, he said, it's really kind of a funny country. He said they do this. So they had a coup. Where it goes from here, I don't know, if they clean up the government, but they're letting everything function as far as going to work, traffic, and they really love the tourists.
Oh, yeah, you got to love the tourists. That's where the money comes from.
That's it. They're not dumb on that one.
You got to get Rush Limbaugh coming in with his, never mind. I should not go there. Leave the children alone. Should not go there. But I guess I kind of did, didn't I? Sad.
Well, that you do that.
Sorry. I apologize. Not really.
It's your show. It's okay.
There's what's going on in the Senate. I understand that this climate change thing kind of real to some could swing some of the elections. What's going on?
Yes, there's a tycoon named Tom. I think he pronounces his name Sayer, and he has a next-gen climate. And he is going to spend about $100 million in 7 states. It's an advocacy group. Now, everybody talks about the Koch brothers, et cetera, but hey, if there's one, there can be another. Let them all line up. But he's going to spend $100 million in 7 states, and he's going after the science deniers. Now, this is interesting, though. He's going to be in some states, too, where, there's some tight United States Senate races. So this guy I think he was from hedge funds, made a lot of money in the corporate world, with $100 million in 7 states this summer. Watch out, he may make the difference. in a couple of races, or he may make some of the Republican candidates start to say, well, maybe there is some scientific back there.
No, I mean, I've talked about this in the past, and I've had a couple of people ask me, well, is he a true progressive? I go, I don't know. I know his issue is the environment. I don't believe his issue is anything worker related, but I think it's purely environmental.
I think it is. I don't think he's, acting as a mouthpiece for the Democratic side or the progressive side or for Harry Reid, the leader of the Senate. I think, from what I understand, this guy is, he believes in this. He's made a lot of money, and he wants to spend it and wants people to realize that there is some scientific back to climate change.
Yeah, there's
very
some,
fascinating.
Yeah, there's some talk that he's going to be spending money here in Pennsylvania because of our governor's infatuation with the drilling industry.
Oh, the fracking?
Yep, all the fracking that's going on, and I would assume Ohio as well. Since
my own county is fracking madness, and it's driven unfortunately, it's driven the rental rates for the poor regular people in Appalachia there. It has driven those rental rates through the ceiling because the oil people are coming in and paying, from what used to be $400 a month rent, they're paying $1,200.
Yep.
And people that live there who are not getting the benefits of the fracking are really hurting on trying to live somewhere.
Well, that's capitalism, Bob.
I mean, there's no rules to this thing now.
Nope.
They did this with longwall mining, and then houses started to collapse, and they came in with rules. We've had some earthquake activity in Ohio, in Youngstown, which they say is related to the fracking.
Yeah, I said from the beginning. A number of years back, I had written a paper for when I was working on my master's degree, and I had taken an environmental course. And back in the 60s, we knew that high-pressure injection caused earthquakes out in Wrangley, Colorado. The military was pumping all kinds of weapons stuff. Who knows what it actually was, but they were really high pressure pumping this stuff underground, and it was causing hundreds of small, low-level earthquakes. So we know we can do that. Now the question is, can we create a really big one? I don't know, but a lot of these little nuisance ones, oh, most certainly.
Yes, and that's what they're starting to look at in Ohio, because we are not an earthquake-prone state, obviously.
No, obviously not. But we'll see what happens, where the money goes. Because I know the Koch brothers are here, so it'll be interesting to see the billionaires duel it out.
Well, they came and they interfered in our local zoo election in Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah,
they killed it. They killed our zoo election.
Jeez.
I mean, it was seriously shocked everybody.
Well, they know what's best, Bob. You don't know anything. They know.
I know, but to the zoos, and leave the poor animals alone.
Well, what
to the political people.
at least make us feel better about ourselves, right?
Right.
See those poor caged animals.
That's right.
Oh, amazing stuff, Bob. Always great talking with you. I appreciate you taking time for us.
Thank you so much.
Bob Ney, Talk Radio News Service. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
Let's review the rap sheet of Wall Street banks. Defrauding investors, cheating homeowners, money laundering, rigging markets, tax evasion, credit card ripoffs, and so sickeningly much more. At last, though, some of the cops on the bank beat seem to be having regulatory epiphanies. The New York Times reports that some financial overseers are questioning, quote, whether such misdeeds are not the work of a few bad actors, but rather a flaw that runs through the fabric of the banking industry. Regulators are starting to ask, is there something rotten in bank culture? Really? Where have they been? Millions of everyday Americans sniffed out that rot back in 2007 at the start of the Wall Street collapse and nauseating bailout. Imagine how pleased they are that it took only 7 years for the stench of bank rot to reach the tender nostrils of authorities. Still, even slow progress is progress. Both the head of the New York Fed and the comptroller of the currency are at least grasping one basic reality, namely that the tightened regulations enacted to deal with a too-big-to-fail issue do nothing about the fundamental ethical collapse among America's big bankers. The problem is that, again and again, Wall Street's culture of greed is rewarded. Bank bosses preside over gross illegalities, are not punished, pocket multi-million-dollar bonuses despite their shoddy ethics, and blithely proceed to the next scandal. More restraint on bank processes miss a core fact. Banks don't engage in wrongdoing. Bankers do. As Comptroller Tom Curry says, the approach to this problem is not to call in more lawyers. It's more like a priest-penitent relationship. This is Jim Hightower saying, public shaming can be useful, but it should include actual punishment of the top bosses. Take away their bonuses, fire a few of them, and prosecute them.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown. From Wall Street to Washington, this monthly newsletter reveals who's doing what to whom and why. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
Let me be clear. I am not gay. I never have been gay.
Being inside a jar, it's not a thing that a right-wing Republican should do. All your talk of family values flushed away in scandalous news, and all your denials are stinking like piles of political poo. Wonder what, Sam? Tap 3 times with your loafer if you want me. Twice on the tank if the answer is no. No? A dirty Larry!
Oh, yeah.
He's unbuckling his belt.
I miss Lusty Larry. Yeah.
White and far right means you're from Idaho.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. I miss that. Remember that? The wide stance, Larry Craig, who got busted in the Minneapolis St. Paul airport. Remember that whole thing? He was claimed just had the wide stance going on. Wasn't actually soliciting the person in the next stall for a little interlude, if you will. Actually was charged, convicted, pled guilty, actually. Not convicted, pled guilty to lewd conduct charges. And then after he got found out, and I don't know how you would have ever thought that you weren't going to get found out as a senator. I just don't know. I don't know how you figure that out. That, well, I can hush this up. That no, they found out. And then came the I'm not gay and I've never been gay, and not that I care. I care that you're a hypocrite, but I don't care what you were doing. 2 consenting adults doing whatever it is that they do, that's their business. Probably just not in the men's room of an airport. Just my thought. But interesting, the very same airport, and you may have seen this story yesterday, one of the Fox News anchors, one of the weekend guys, Greg Jarrett, who was really, on the Trayvon Martin thing, claiming that Trayvon Martin had smoked pot, and that, claimed that Zimmerman had been punished enough because Zimmerman had gained some weight. Murder, gain some weight. Okay, I see the thought. Anyway, Mr. Jarrett was taken into police custody about 2:30 in the afternoon at the Northern Lights Grill in the main terminal. A little drunk and disorderly. He was charged with obstruction of the legal process. Taken to jail for being belligerent, and maybe just being belligerent is enough. But released on a $300 bond about 1:30 a.m. So he got picked up at noon, out by 1:30, just in time to hit closing time at the bar. Now, what's interesting is you read some of the reports. Evidently, he'd been off on some leave because maybe he showed up drunk one day to read the news. And I got to be honest, if I worked at Fox News and I had to spew the BS and I had to go with the corporate line, I think I'd drink too. I think I would. You got to kill the pain somehow. Anyway, I appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. Back tomorrow with our Friday program. Next week, a little vacation, taking a week off. I have got a honey-do list that matches none. It's been about 9 years since I've gotten to the honey-do list. My wife is now saying, now, you have to do it now. So that will be my vacation. So pity for me, little pity for me. Again, love to hear from you. Rick at thericksmithshow.com. See you back here tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email Rick at thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where people come to talk.
It's coming like the tide flood beneath the lunar sway, imperial, mysterious, and amorous array. Democracy is coming to the USA.